Have you ever felt invisible? Not ignored. Truly invisible, like you're not even human enough to acknowledge? That was Ella Mark's life. Until one cruel invitation changed everything. The alarm screamed at 4:15 a.m., the same way it did every morning. Ella's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it before the second beep in the darkness of her studio apartment. She could hear the pipes rattling in the walls, the neighbor's television bleeding through cheap drywall, and the distant wail of sirens that never seemed to stop in this part of the city. She didn't need light to navigate her morning routine. Her body knew the choreography by heart. Feet on cold linoleum, 3 steps to the bathroom, shower with water that took 5 minutes to warm up. She dressed in the dark. The same gray uniform she'd worn yesterday and the day before that, and every day for the past 3 years. It hung loose on her frame, 2 sizes too big, with her name stitched crookedly on the chest pocket in fading red thread. Ella. By 4:50 a.m., she was on the first of 3 buses that would carry her across the city, from the neighborhood where rent was cheap and hope was cheaper, to the gleaming district where buildings touched clouds and people touched money. The Maron Luxury Hotel rose 37 stories into the sky, all glass and steel and architectural audacity. It was the kind of place that appeared in travel magazines with words like opulent, exclusive, and unparalleled luxury. The lobby alone could have housed Ella's entire apartment building. Marble floors imported from Italy caught the light from crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything gleamed. Everything sparkled. Everything whispered the same message. You don't belong here. But Ella did belong here, just not in the way the guests did. At exactly 5 a.m., she pushed through the service entrance, never the front doors, always the back, and clocked with a card that identified her as employee number 2847. The staff locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and tired dreams. She pulled her cleaning cart from storage. The squeaky front wheel that never got fixed, the mop with the handle wrapped in duct tape, the bottles of solution that made her eyes water. Her hands gripped the cart handle. 25 years old, but her hands told a different story. They were rough, calloused, marked by years of scrubbing and cleaning and surviving. Hands that held scholarship letters and graduation diplomas now held mops and rags. She looked at them sometimes and barely recognized them as her own. The hotel was just beginning to wake up. Early morning joggers returned from runs, their designer workout clothes still crisp and perfect. Business executives headed to power breakfast, briefcases worth more than Ella's monthly rent swinging at their sides. A couple in matching robes glided toward the spa, laughing about something Ella would never understand. She pushed her cart down the hall, and they flowed around her like water around a stone. Not one of them looked at her face. Not one of them saw her as human. She was part of the building, like the furniture or the fixtures, necessary for function, irrelevant for acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Ella murmured, moving her cart aside as a man in a $1,000 suit barreled past, eyes on his phone, not even registering that she'd spoken. This was her life. This was survival. By 7 a.m., Ella had cleaned 4 rooms and 3 hallways. Her back already ached. Her knees already protested. But there were 23 more rooms on her list. She learned early that if you stayed quiet and kept moving, the day passed faster. If you made yourself small enough, you could almost disappear. But sometimes, people made sure you knew you were there. Finally, a woman snapped as Ella approached room 1847. The woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a silk robe that probably cost what Ella made in a month. "I've been waiting for housekeeping for 10 minutes. Do you people not understand urgency?" "I apologize, ma'am," Ella said softly, eyes down. "What can I help you with?" "The coffee maker isn't working." "Fix it." Ella stepped inside. The coffee maker was unplugged. She bent down, pushed the plug into the outlet, and pressed the power button. It hummed to life. "It just needed to be plugged in, ma'am." The woman stared at her like Ella had insulted her entire lineage. "Well, someone should have made sure it was plugged in before I checked in. This is unacceptable." She turned away, dismissing Ella with a wave of her hand. "You can go." "No, thank you." No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. Ella pushed her cart to the next floor. At 9:30 a.m., She was cleaning the hallway near the executive suites when two women walked past, designer shopping bags hanging from their arms, expensive perfume trailing behind them like toxic clouds. "I'm telling you, the service here has really gone downhill," one said, voice carrying clearly. She didn't bother lowering it. Didn't care that Ella was 5 feet away. "I had to ask 3 times for extra towels yesterday." "I know," the other one agreed, eyeing Ella's cart with distaste. "And make sure she doesn't touch your luggage when she comes to clean. You never know with these people." These people. Ella's hands tightened on the mop handle. Her jaw clenched. Her stomach twisted with familiar shame and rage and helplessness all braided together. But she kept her face neutral, her eyes down, her body small. Bills don't care about pride, she reminded herself. Survival first. Always survival first. The women walked away, their laughter echoing down the corridor like breaking glass. By noon, Ella had learned to recognize the different types of invisible she could be. There was invisible where people looked through her, past her, around her, like she was a ghost they couldn't quite see. There was invisible where people saw her but refused to acknowledge her humanity, like she was a robot programmed only for cleaning. And there was the worst kind of invisible, where people saw her, acknowledged her, but only to remind her of her place. She was wiping down the marble railing on the second-floor balcony when a family passed by. Mother, father, 2 children. The little boy, maybe 7 years old, looked at Ella and smiled. "Hi," he said brightly. Ella felt something crack in her chest. A smile, genuine and warm, started to form on her face. "Hi there. Jacob, come here." The mother grabbed the boy's hand, pulling him away. She looked at Ella with something cold and flat in her eyes. Not anger. Worse. Indifference. Like Ella was a stray dog the child shouldn't interact with. The boy looked confused. "But Mom, I said come here." They walked away. The boy glanced back once, still confused about what he'd done wrong. Ella turned back to the railing. She scrubbed harder than necessary, the motion giving her somewhere to put the feeling building in her chest. She had learned, over these 3 years, how to swallow anger, how to compress hurt into something small and manageable, how to survive by making herself smaller and smaller until she almost disappeared. This is temporary, she told herself, like she told herself every day. This isn't forever. This isn't who you are. But some days, it was hard to remember who she used to be. At 2:47 p.m., Ella heard them before she saw them. Laughter, sharp and bright and expensive, echoing down the marble hallway, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. The rustle of designer fabric and the clink of champagne glasses carried from the hotel bar. Ella knew that sound. She felt her shoulders tense automatically, her body preparing for impact. Evelyn Maron swept around a corner like a hurricane in Chanel. 26 years old, blonde hair styled in perfect waves, skin that glowed with the kind of radiance that came from monthly spa treatments and zero stress. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged every calculated curve, heels that cost more than Ella's rent, and jewelry that caught the light with aggressive sparkle. Behind her came her entourage. 3 women cut from the same cloth, all designer labels and manufactured beauty and inherited confidence. They moved through the world like they owned it, because, in many ways, they did. Evelyn Maron wasn't just beautiful. She was cruel, and she had been cruel to Ella since the first day they'd met. Most people ignored Ella. Evelyn noticed her, and that was so much worse. "Oh, perfect," Evelyn announced loudly, stopping directly in Ella's path. "The cleaning lady is here. Girls, we can finally get this hallway properly sanitized." Her friends giggled. One of them wrinkled her nose at Ella's cart. Ella stepped aside, eyes down, saying nothing. "Careful with that mop," Evelyn continued, gesturing at the marble floor with one manicure hand. "This marble costs more than you'll make in your entire life. Imported from Tuscany. But you probably don't know where that is, do you?" "I know where Tuscany is, ma'am," Ella said quietly. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Did I ask you a question?" Ella's mouth closed. Her hands gripped the mop tighter. Everyone in the hotel knew Evelyn's story. even if they pretended not to gossip about it. She married Jade Maron 6 months ago in a ceremony that made national news. Jade was 90 years old, a real estate billionaire who'd built half the city's skyline. Evelyn was his third wife, young enough to be his great-granddaughter. The math wasn't complicated. Neither was the motivation. Jade Maron owned this hotel, which meant Evelyn owned it too, which meant Ella was at her mercy every single day. "You know," Evelyn said, circling Ella slowly like a predator studying prey, "I've been thinking about you." Ella's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from Evelyn thinking about her. "Have you?" Ella managed to keep her voice neutral. "Mom." Evelyn tilted her head, studying Ella with those cold blue eyes. "You work so hard. You're here every day, so dedicated. It's almost admirable. In a simple, uncomplicated way." Her friends laughed on cue. "That's why," Evelyn continued, reaching into her designer purse, "I've decided to do something nice for you." She pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Thick, expensive paper. The kind used for weddings and galas and events Ella would never attend. "What is that?" one of Evelyn's friends asked, barely containing her giggles. "A surprise," Evelyn said, smiling sweetly. "Ella, you've been such a fixture here at the hotel, like part of the family. And that's why—" She held out the envelope, and Ella saw her name written in gold calligraphy on the front. "I want you to come to something special." Ella stared at the envelope. Every instinct screamed danger. This wasn't kindness. Evelyn didn't do kindness. But what choice did she have? Refusing might mean her job. Refusing might mean being labeled difficult or ungrateful. Refusing might mean not making rent next month. Slowly, Ella reached out and took the envelope. "Thank you," she heard herself say. Evelyn's smile widened. "Open it." Ella's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation, printed on the same expensive paper, with more gold lettering that caught the light. "You are cordially invited to the vow renewal ceremony of Evelyn Collins and Jade Maron. Saturday, 7 p.m. Grand Bellwood Estate. Black tie, black tie." The words hit Ella like a fist to the stomach. "Isn't that wonderful?" Evelyn gushed, her voice sugar-sweet and poison-laced. "Jade and I are renewing our vows, 6 months of wedded bliss, and we want all our favorite people there, including you." One of her friends couldn't hold back anymore. She giggled into her champagne glass. "It's black tie," Evelyn added unnecessarily. "So make sure you dress appropriately. Wear your best dress. Or, you know—" Her eyes traveled slowly over Ella's cleaning uniform, the worn fabric, the stains that wouldn't come out no matter how many times Ella washed it. "Whatever you can find." The laughter came then, bright and sharp and deliberately cruel. "Maybe she can borrow something from the hotel lost and found," another friend suggested. "Or maybe Goodwill is having a sale," a third one added. They laughed harder. Evelyn watched Ella's face, searching for the reaction she wanted. Tears, anger, humiliation, something that would confirm her power and Ella's powerlessness. But Ella had learned, over 3 years of surviving, how to hide what she felt, how to take the hit and stay standing, how to swallow poison and smile. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "This is very kind of you." Evelyn's smile faltered for just a second. She'd expected more. Expected begging or pleading or refusing. But Ella just stood there, holding the invitation, dignified despite everything. "Well," Evelyn recovered quickly. "I do hope you'll come. It would be so memorable." The women swept away, their laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Ella stood alone in the hallway, holding the cream-colored envelope with its gold lettering and its cruel joke wrapped in pretty paper. Her hands shook. Her chest felt tight. Her eyes burned. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then pushed her cart quickly toward the nearest supply closet. Inside, surrounded by cleaning bottles and spare towels and the smell of industrial bleach, she let herself feel it. One tear slipped down her cheek. Just one. She wiped it away quickly, angrily. "This is who they think you are," a voice whispered in her head. "This is all they'll ever see." But then another voice, quieter but stronger, pushed back. "Is it?" Ella looked at the invitation again. Black tie, Grand Bellwood Estate. The kind of event where she'd be the joke, the entertainment, the cautionary tale about knowing your place. She thought about throwing it away, about pretending this never happened, about staying small and invisible and safe. But something in her chest, something that had been sleeping for 3 years, began to wake up. She folded the invitation carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible at work? How did you handle it? Ella took a deep breath, wiped her face one more time, and pushed the cart back out into the hallway. She had 17 more rooms to clean. Bills didn't stop because of hurt feelings. But as she worked through the afternoon, she couldn't stop thinking about that envelope in her pocket, about Evelyn's cruel smile, about the laughter of people who thought she was nothing. And for the first time in 3 years, Ella Mark felt something other than resignation. She felt anger. By 6 p.m., her shift ended. She returned the cart to storage, clocked out, and began the long commute home. 3 buses, an hour and a half, watching the city transform as she traveled from wealth to poverty, from gleaming towers to struggling streets. In her apartment, she pulled out the invitation and set it on the small table. The gold letters seemed to mock her under the dim overhead light. Then her eyes drifted to the shelf above her bed, to a small wooden box she hadn't opened in 3 years. A box that held a different life, a different version of herself, a past she tried to forget because remembering hurt too much. Ella stood up slowly. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. She reached for the box. And outside her window, across the city in a penthouse suite at the Maron Luxury Hotel, Evelyn Maron laughed with her friends about the joke they'd just pulled, about the cleaning lady who would probably show up in something pathetic, about how entertaining Saturday night was going to be. But Evelyn's heels were already clicking closer to a moment she couldn't imagine. Her cream envelope had already set something in motion that she couldn't control. And Ella Mark, holding that wooden box in her hands, was about to remember something Evelyn had never learned. Some people aren't invisible. They're just waiting for the right moment to be seen. Sometimes the cruelest gifts come wrapped in pretty paper. The cream-colored envelope appeared in Evelyn's perfectly manicured hand, like a weapon disguised as a gift. Thick, expensive paper. The kind used for weddings and galas and events where people like Ella didn't exist except to serve champagne and clean up afterward. Ella, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that made Ella's skin crawl. I have something very special for you. Her friends exchanged glances, their smiles sharpening. One of them bit her lip, trying not to laugh. Another raised her champagne glass to hide her grin. Ella looked at the envelope, then at Evelyn's face. Those cold blue eyes gleamed with something predatory, something cruel. Every instinct Ella had screamed danger. What is it? Ella asked quietly. Open it and see. Evelyn thrust the envelope forward. Ella's hands trembled slightly as she set down her mop and took it. The paper felt heavy, expensive. Her name was written across the front in gold calligraphy, Ms. Ella Mark. Not Ella the janitor or housekeeping staff. Just her name, elegant and mocking in equal measure. She could feel eyes on her. A few guests had stopped in the lobby to watch. Hotel staff paused in their duties. Something was happening, and in a place like the Maron, where boredom was the enemy, entertainment was always welcome. Ella opened the envelope carefully. Inside was an invitation card, cream and gold, with lettering that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. You are cordially invited to the vow renewal ceremony of Mrs. Evelyn Collins Maron and Mr. Jade Maron Saturday, September 16th, 7 p.m. Grand Bellwood Estate, black tie. Black tie. The words hit Ella like a slap across the face. Isn't it wonderful? Evelyn gushed, clasping her hands together like she'd just done something incredibly generous. Jade and I are celebrating 6 months of marriage. 6 glorious months, and we want all our favorite people there to share in our joy. One of her friends couldn't hold it in any more. A giggle escaped, quickly covered by a fake cough. The Grand Bellwood Estate, another friend added, her voice full of artificial enthusiasm. Do you know it, Ella? It's only the most exclusive venue in the city. They filmed that royal wedding documentary there last year. 16,000 square feet of pure elegance, the third friend chimed in. The chandeliers alone are worth more than, she paused, eyes traveling deliberately over Ella's worn uniform. Well, more than most things. They all looked at Ella, waiting, watching, hungry for her reaction. Ella stared at the invitation. Her mind raced through the implications. Black tie meant evening gowns, designer labels, jewelry that sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Black tie meant a world she'd been exiled from 3 years ago. Black tie meant showing up to be the joke, the entertainment, the cautionary tale about knowing your place. It's a Saturday, Evelyn said, tapping the date with one perfect fingernail. I know that's short notice, but we just had to have you there. You've been such a fixture here at the hotel. Like part of the family, really. Part of the furniture, more like, one friend muttered, and the others dissolved into barely suppressed laughter. Evelyn shot them a look that said not yet, then turned back to Ella with that saccharine smile. So make sure you dress appropriately. It is black tie after all. Her eyes traveled slowly, deliberately over Ella's stained uniform, her worn shoes, her rough hands. Wear your best dress. You know. She paused for effect. Whatever you can find. The laughter came then, bright and sharp and deliberately cruel. Maybe the hotel lost and found has something, one friend suggested. Her voice pitched loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. I saw a bridesmaid dress from the Morrison wedding last week. It's only got one wine stain. Or Goodwill, another added gleefully. They have a sale section, don't they? Target, the third offered. I've heard they have a formal section, right next to the cleaning supplies. How convenient. They dissolved into laughter again, champagne sloshing in their glasses. Other guests in the lobby pretended not to watch, but Ella could feel their eyes. She could feel their pity, their secondhand embarrassment, their relief that they weren't the target of this particular cruelty. Evelyn watched Ella's face like a scientist observing an experiment. She wanted tears. She wanted anger. She wanted Ella to break down, to refuse, to give her the satisfaction of public humiliation right here and now. But Ella had learned, over 3 years of swallowing insults, how to hide what she felt, how to take the hit and stay standing, how to survive. She looked up from the invitation. Her hands were steady now. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Thank you, she said. This is very kind of you. Evelyn blinked. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. I what? Thank you for the invitation, Ella repeated, meeting Evelyn's eyes directly for the first time. I appreciate being included. The laughter stopped. Evelyn's friends exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. You're gonna come? Evelyn asked, her voice losing some of its practiced sweetness. If my schedule permits, Ella said carefully. Saturday is sometimes a busy day. Your schedule, Evelyn repeated slowly, like she was tasting something bitter. Right, your very important janitor schedule. Housekeeping schedule, Ella corrected gently. But yes. For a moment, something flickered across Evelyn's face. Confusion, frustration, maybe even a hint of respect for the fact that Ella hadn't crumbled. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that cold, practiced smile. Well then, Evelyn said, recovering her composure, I do hope you can make it. It would be so... She paused, searching for the word. Memorable. She turned on her designer heels, her friends falling into formation behind her. As they walked away, Ella heard one of them whisper urgently, She's actually going to come? This is going to be amazing. Their laughter echoed across the marble lobby, bouncing off the expensive surfaces, sharp as broken glass. Ella stood alone, holding the cream-colored invitation with its gold lettering and its poison wrapped in pretty paper. Ella's hands shook as she folded the invitation and slipped it into the pocket of her uniform. The paper felt like it was burning against her leg, branding her with its cruelty. She picked up her mop. The handle was slicked with her nervous sweat. Her legs felt unsteady, like the marble floor beneath her feet had turned to water. Keep moving, she told herself. Just keep moving. She pushed her cart forward, the squeaky wheel announcing her departure like a laugh track following a joke. Faces turned away as she passed. Conversations resumed. The moment was over for everyone else, but not for Ella. Ella. She turned to see Marcus, one of the bellhops, standing near the concierge desk. He was 23, had been working at the hotel for 2 years, and was one of the few people who treated Ella like a human being. He gestured for her to come over. When she did, his voice was low, sympathetic. "You okay?" he asked. Ella nodded, not trusting her voice. "That was messed up," Marcus continued. "Everyone saw it. Everyone knows what she was doing." "It's fine," Ella managed. "It's not fine. It's—" "Marcus." The hotel manager's voice cut across the lobby like a knife. Richard Sterling stood near the front desk, his suit immaculate, his expression cold. He crooked one finger at Ella. Her stomach dropped. She pushed her cart toward him, leaving Marcus behind. When she reached Sterling, he didn't bother lowering his voice. "I saw what happened," he said. "Yes, sir." "Mrs. Maron invited you to her vow renewal." "Yes, sir." Sterling's eyes were flat, unreadable. "Don't make trouble." Ella blinked. "I'm sorry. You heard me. Don't make trouble. Don't cause a scene. Don't do anything that reflects poorly on this hotel." He adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Maron can do whatever she wants. You're an employee. Act like it." The words hit harder than any of Evelyn's insults. At least Evelyn's cruelty was obvious. This was worse. Institutional indifference, the machinery of power protecting those who had it and grinding down those who didn't. "I understand," Ella said quietly. "Good." Sterling turned away, dismissing her. Ella stood there for a moment, the invitation burning in her pocket, the weight of knowing settling in her bones. She wasn't just meant to be a joke. She was meant to be a joke that everyone would watch, that everyone would remember, that would serve as a reminder to all the other people like her about where they belonged. She pushed her cart toward the service elevator. Other staff members avoided her eyes. They'd all seen it. They all knew. And they all knew that speaking up meant risking the same treatment. In the service elevator, alone with her cart and her shame, Ella let herself feel it. Just for a moment. The humiliation, the anger, the helplessness. Then she pushed it down, compressed it, swallowed it, because her shift wasn't over. She still had 12 more rooms to clean. And bills didn't care about dignity. At 6 p.m., Ella clocked out. She changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, putting on the jeans and T-shirt she'd worn that morning. The invitation was still in her uniform pocket. She transferred it to her purse, unable to leave it behind, but unable to look at it either. The first bus came at 6:17 p.m. It took her from a gleaming hotel district, where buildings scraped the sky and money flowed like water, to the commercial district, where chain restaurants and office parks lined the streets. She sat in the back, exhausted. Through the window, she watched the city transform. Glass towers gave way to shorter buildings. Designer boutiques became discount stores. The people changed too. Fewer suits, more work uniforms, more tired faces that looked like hers. The second bus came at 6:52 p.m. This one took her deeper into the city's working neighborhoods. Laundromats and bodegas and check-cashing places. Apartment buildings with bars on the windows. Kids playing in the street because there was nowhere else to play. Ella transferred to the third bus at 7:28 p.m. By now, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if she'd had the energy to notice. This bus was crowded. People getting off work from second shifts, going to work for night shifts, carrying the same exhaustion Ella felt in her bones. She got off at 7:47 p.m., 3 blocks from her apartment building. The neighborhood was quiet in the way places get when people are too tired to make noise. A few men sat on a stoop, drinking beer and talking in low voices. A woman pushed a stroller quickly, head down. Someone's music played from an open window, the bass shaking the glass. Ella's apartment building was 6 stories, built in the 1970s and showing every year. The brick was crumbling in places. Graffiti decorated the ground floor. The front door required you to pull hard and push simultaneously to get it open. Inside, the lobby smelled like old cooking and something unidentifiable. The elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it. It had been there for 3 weeks. Ella climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, her legs protesting every step. She carried a bag from the dollar store, cleaning supplies she picked up on her way home because the hotel didn't let staff take anything, even empty bottles. She bought her own supplies and brought them home, refilling them in her bathroom sink because buying individual bottles at the hotel's inflated prices would cost more than she could afford. 4th floor. Her keys jingled in her hand as she walked down the hallway, past doors where televisions blared, where couples argued, where babies cried. Door 4C. Her door. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The studio apartment was exactly 300 square feet. Everything in one room. Bed, kitchenette, table, chair, a small bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, but it was hers. She paid $850 a month for it, which was cheap by city standards and astronomical by her budget standards. Ella set down her purse and the bag of supplies. She locked the door behind her. 2 locks, both of them necessary. She took off her shoes, and then she just stood there. The invitation called to her from her purse. She pulled it out, set it on the small table. The gold lettering seemed to mock her under the flickering overhead light. Black tie. Grand Bellwood Estate. Saturday at 7 p.m. 3 days away. Ella looked around her apartment. Her entire wardrobe consisted of 3 pairs of jeans, 5 t-shirts, her work uniform, and a single dress she'd bought for her grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. Black, simple, respectful. Nothing that would pass for black tie. She could go to Goodwill, like Evelyn's friends had suggested. She could try to find something, anything, that might let her blend in. She could show up and try to be invisible, try to disappear into the crowd, try to survive the night with minimal damage. Or she could not go at all. She could throw away the invitation, pretend this never happened, keep her head down and her dignity intact. But both options felt like losing. Both options felt like letting Evelyn win. Ella's eyes drifted upward to the shelf above her bed, to a small wooden box she kept there. A box she hadn't opened in 3 years. A box that held a different life, a different version of herself, a past she'd buried because remembering hurt too much. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The box was made of mahogany, a gift from her grandmother on her 18th birthday, carved into the lid with the words, "Dignity is not given, it is carried." Ella set the box on the table next to the invitation. The contrast was sharp. Expensive cream paper next to wornwood, cruelty next to love, present next to past. She opened the box slowly. What would you do? Would you go to prove them wrong? Or stay home with your dignity? Drop your answer below, we want to know. Inside were photographs, not of this life, but of another one. A life where Ella smiled easily, where she wore beautiful clothes, where she stood on stages and spoke to crowds. There was a picture of her at 18, holding a trophy for the debate championship. Another at 20, shaking hands with a senator at a charity event. And her favorite, Ella standing beside her grandmother, both of them beaming at the grand opening of the Mark Legal Aid Foundation. Her grandmother, Dr. Miriam Mark, had been a legend, a civil rights lawyer who fought for justice when justice wasn't popular, who built a foundation that helped thousands, who taught Ella that power wasn't about money. It was about voice, about standing up, about never letting anyone make you feel small. Ella's finger traced her grandmother's face in the photograph. The strong jaw, the proud eyes, the smile that could light up a room or cut down injustice with equal ease. What would you do, Grandma? Ella whispered to the empty apartment. But she knew the answer. Her grandmother would never have hidden, would never have let cruelty go unchallenged, would never have accepted invisibility as survival. Something in Ella's chest cracked open, not breaking, unlocking, like a door that had been sealed for 3 years, was finally beginning to open. She looked at the invitation again, then at the photographs, then at her reflection in the darkened window. "They think I'm nobody," she whispered. "They think I'm just a janitor." Her jaw tightened. Maybe it's time they remember who I really am. Ella reached for her phone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through her contacts. Past names she hadn't called in years. Past connections she'd severed when everything fell apart. She stopped at one name, Maron Luxury, her grandmother's best friend. A fashion designer who dressed politicians, activists, and icons. A woman who had reached out after the funeral, offering help that Ella had been too proud, too ashamed, too broken to accept. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending that part of her life never existed. 3 years of being invisible. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to be seen again. Ella's thumb hovered over the call button. Her heart pounded. The invitation sat on the table, cream and gold and cruel. The photograph sat in the box, memories and legacy and truth. And Ella Mark, surrounded by both her present and her past, made a choice. She pressed call. If you've ever been set up to fail, share this story. Someone needs to see it. Everyone has a past. But some pasts are so powerful, they refuse to stay buried. Ella's hands trembled as she lifted the mahogany box from the shelf. It was heavier than she remembered, though that might have been the weight of everything it contained, memories, grief, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She set it on the small table next to the cream-colored invitation. The contrast was almost painful. Worn wood that had survived 3 years of being ignored next to pristine paper that had existed for only hours. Legacy next to cruelty. Truth next to lies. The carved words on the lid caught the flickering overhead light. Dignity is not given. It is carried. Her grandmother's handwriting. Her grandmother's voice. Her grandmother's truth. Ella's fingers traced the letters slowly, feeling each groove, each curve. She'd traced these same letters on her 18th birthday when she first received the box. She'd traced them at her college graduation. She'd traced them the day she opened the Mark Foundation offices. And she'd traced them one last time at her grandmother's funeral before closing the box and trying to close that chapter of her life forever. But some chapters refused to end. She lifted the lid. The hinges creaked softly, like the box itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Inside, protected by tissue paper that had yellowed with time, were the photographs. Ella picked up the first one with shaking hands. 18 years old. High school debate championship. She stood on a stage holding a trophy that was almost as tall as she was, her smile so wide and genuine it looked like it could light up the world. She wore a navy blazer and a white blouse, her natural hair styled in a professional bun. Her eyes shone with confidence, with possibility, with a future that seemed limitless. She barely recognized that girl. The second photograph, 20 years old, junior year of college, a charity gala at the Riverside Hotel, the same hotel where she now cleaned toilets. In the photo, she wore an elegant black dress, her hair in sophisticated twists, standing beside a senator who had come to speak about criminal justice reform. They were shaking hands, both smiling, and Ella remembered how the senator had complimented her speech, had asked for a card, had told her she had a bright future in advocacy. A bright future. Ella's chest tightened. Her eyes began to burn. The third photograph made her breath catch. Her favorite, the one she sometimes saw in her dreams. She was 21. Her grandmother was 73. They stood together at the grand opening of the Mark Legal Aid Foundation in front of a banner that read, "Justice for all, not just for some." Her grandmother wore a beautiful purple suit. Purple had always been her power color. Ella wore a cream dress with gold accents. Both of them were beaming, arms around each other. Their faces so similar it was like looking at past and future merge into one moment. The foundation had been her grandmother's dream, to provide free legal services to people who couldn't afford lawyers, to fight for the marginalized, the forgotten, the invisible, to use the law not as a weapon of oppression, but as a tool of liberation. And Ella had been right there beside her, learning, growing, becoming. A tear slipped down Ella's cheek. Then another. She didn't wipe them away. She pulled out more photographs, spreading them across the table like evidence at a trial. Evidence of a life that had existed. Evidence that she had been somebody before she became nobody. Ella speaking at a community forum about education reform. Ella organizing a fundraiser that raised $50,000 in one night. Ella mentoring high school students, teaching them about civic engagement. Ella standing with clients a foundation had helped, a single mother who kept her children, an elderly man who saved his home, a young man who got a second chance. Each photograph was a memory. Each memory was a heartbeat of the person she used to be. Her hands pressed flat against the table. Photographs spread before her like a map of a country she'd been exiled from. Her breathing came quick and shallow. The tiny apartment felt even smaller, the walls closing in, the weight of 3 years of pretending pressing down on her shoulders. "I was somebody," she whispered to the empty room. "I was somebody. 5 years earlier. Ella, baby, come look at this." Ella looked up from her laptop. She'd been drafting a proposal for expanding the foundation's services. To see her grandmother standing by the office window. The afternoon sun backlit her silver hair like a halo, and her purple dress, always purple, her signature color, seemed to glow. At 73, Dr. Miriam Mark was still a force of nature. She'd spent 50 years as a civil rights lawyer, fighting battles that most people were too afraid to fight. In the 1960s, she defended freedom riders in the Deep South. In the 1970s, she'd taken on police brutality cases when doing so meant death threats. In the 1980s and 90s, she'd built a reputation as a lawyer you called when you had no money but needed justice anyway. And in her 70s, she'd started the Mark Legal Aid Foundation with one mission, to make sure that justice wasn't just for people who could afford it. Ella joined her grandmother at the window. Below, on the street, a young woman was leaving their office building with her 2 children. She was crying but smiling. Earlier that day, the foundation had helped her file a restraining order against her abusive ex-husband. For free, because she couldn't afford a lawyer, and the system wasn't designed to help people like her. "You see that?" Miriam asked softly. "I see her." "No, baby. Look closer. What do you really see?" Ella watched the woman hug her children tighter, watched her stand a little straighter as she walked down the street. "I see someone who's safe now," Ella said. "You see power," Miriam corrected gently. "Real power. Not the kind that comes from money or position. The kind that comes from standing up when everyone expects you to sit down. From speaking when everyone expects you to be silent. From existing with dignity when the world tells you you're not worthy of it." She turned to Ella, her dark eyes intense. "That's what we do here, Ella. We don't just provide legal services. We remind people of their power. We give them back their voice." Ella had heard this speech before, in different forms, throughout her whole life. Her grandmother had been teaching her these lessons since she was old enough to understand them. Power is voice, not money. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting in the back of courtrooms while her grandmother argued cases. Watching her grandmother face down judges and prosecutors and systems designed to crush people who looked like them. And never, not once, seeing her grandmother back down. She remembered being 12, attending her first protest march. Her grandmother holding her hand as they walked through streets demanding justice for a young man killed by police, teaching her the chance, teaching her that silence was complicity. She remembered being 16, her first time volunteering at a community legal clinic, watching her grandmother explain complex legal concepts to people with limited education, with patience and respect, never talking down, always lifting up. And she remembered being 20, when her grandmother asked her to be more than just a volunteer. "I'm getting older, baby," Miriam had said. "I won't be here forever. This foundation needs to outlive me. It needs someone who understands not just the law, but the mission. Someone who believes that justice is a right, not a privilege." She'd taken Ella's hands in hers. "I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. I'm asking you to join me in mine. Will you help me build something that matters?" Ella had said yes. Of course she'd said yes. How could she say anything else? So she'd changed her major to pre-law. She'd interned at the foundation through college. She'd learned not just from law books, but from her grandmother's 50 years of experience. She'd sat in on client meetings, drafted documents, researched cases. She'd learned how to speak to reporters, how to organize fundraisers, how to build coalitions. She'd learned how to fight. The foundation grew. What started as a small office with 2 lawyers became a vital community resource. They helped hundreds of people every year. They took on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. They challenged systems that everyone else accepted as unchangeable. And Ella was right there at the center of it. Her grandmother's protege and eventual successor in waiting. She spoke at community forums. She organized legal workshops. She testified before city council. She was 22 years old and already making a name for herself. People knew her, respected her, saw her as someone who mattered. Dr. Miriam Mark's granddaughter, a future leader, a voice for the voiceless. Ella had believed she was building a legacy. She had believed she was invincible. She had been wrong. It happened on a Tuesday. Ella was at the foundation office, preparing for a major fundraising gala, when her phone rang. Her grandmother's neighbor, her voice shaking. "Ella, you need to come." "It's Miriam. The ambulance is here." Massive stroke. The doctors said she never felt any pain. One moment she was reading in her favorite chair. The next moment she was gone. 73 years of fighting, of teaching, of loving. Over in an instant. Ella was 22 years old, and suddenly she was alone. The funeral was huge. Hundreds of people came. Former clients, fellow activists, judges, lawyers, community leaders. They told stories about Miriam Mark, about the cases she'd won, about the lives she'd changed, about the legacy she'd built. And everyone looked at Ella with expectation in their eyes. You're going to carry on her work, right? The foundation will continue, won't it? She would want you to keep fighting. Ella had promised. Through her tears, through her grief, she had promised. She tried. God, she tried. But she was 22 and drowning in grief. She didn't know how to run a nonprofit. Didn't know how to manage budgets and grants and fundraising campaigns. Her grandmother had handled all of that while Ella focused on the legal work and client services. Within a month, the cracks started showing. The foundation's main grant wasn't renewed. The grant writer her grandmother had used retired, and Ella didn't know how to write one that would pass. 2 of the 3 lawyers quit. They'd stayed out of loyalty to Miriam, but they had better offers elsewhere. The landlord raised the rent on the office space. Within 3 months, the vultures arrived. A creditor claiming her grandmother owed money for office equipment. A former client threatening to sue over a case that hadn't gone their way. A lawyer offering to help manage the foundation's finances in exchange for an ownership stake. People who saw an opportunity in Ella's grief, who wanted to pick apart what Miriam had built and take whatever pieces they could carry. Ella fought. She tried to hold it together. She worked 20-hour days. She learned grant writing from YouTube videos. She took on more cases than she could handle. She burned through the foundation's savings trying to keep the doors open. But she was 22, grieving and drowning. Within 6 months, the money was gone. Within 9 months, the office was empty. Within a year, the Mark Legal Aid Foundation ceased to exist. Everything her grandmother had built, everything Ella had promised to protect, gone. And then came Ella's own descent. She deferred law school to work at the foundation, so she had no degree to fall back on. She'd spent all her time on the foundation, so she had no other job experience. She'd burned through her savings trying to keep it alive, so she had no financial cushion. She found work where she could. First, a paid internship at another nonprofit, but they laid her off after 3 months when their funding was cut. Then, a community organizing position, but it paid barely enough to cover rent, and they let her go when she couldn't afford a car to do outreach in distant neighborhoods. She tried retail, tried food service, tried temp work. Each job paid less than the last. Each job was a step further from who she used to be. And with each step down, she felt herself disappearing. People who used to know her name stopped recognizing her. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. Invitations to events dried up. Phone calls went unreturned. She wasn't Dr. Miriam Mark's granddaughter anymore. She wasn't a community leader. She wasn't someone who mattered. She was just another young woman struggling to survive. The shame was almost worse than the poverty. The shame of failing, of not being strong enough, of letting down her grandmother's memory, of becoming invisible when she'd once been seen. By the time she took the job at the Maron Luxury Hotel 3 years ago, Ella had learned to accept her new reality. She cleaned toilets in the same building where she'd once attended galas. She pushed a mop past people who'd once listened to her speak. She made herself small and quiet and forgettable because survival required invisibility. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd find a way back, that this wasn't forever. But 3 years passed, and temporary became permanent. Survival became identity. Until tonight. If this story is hitting you in the chest, hit that like button. Ella's journey is just beginning. Ella sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by photographs of who she used to be and an invitation that represented who people thought she was now. The tears had dried on her face. The grief had settled back into its familiar place in her chest. But something had shifted. She picked up her phone and stared at the contact she hadn't called in 3 years. Maron Luxury. Simone had been at the funeral, had held Ella while she sobbed, had offered help, money, connections, anything Ella needed. And Ella, drowning in shame and pride, had pushed her away, had disappeared, had spent 3 years too embarrassed to reach out to the people who'd known her grandmother, who'd known the life she'd lost. But maybe shame was just another form of invisibility. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living. Ella looked at her reflection in the darkened window of her apartment. She saw a tired 25-year-old woman in a t-shirt and jeans. She saw rough hands and exhausted eyes. She saw someone the world had decided was nobody. But underneath that reflection, she could see the ghost of another person. The 18-year-old debate champion, the 20-year-old activist, the 21-year-old woman standing beside her grandmother, believing she could change the world. That person was still there, buried under 3 years of grief and shame and survival, but still there. They think I'm nobody, Ella whispered to her reflection. They think I'm just a janitor. Her jaw tightened, her spine straightened. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. Dignity is not given. It is carried. Maybe, Ella said, her voice stronger now. It's time to remember who I really am. She looked at the photographs one more time, then at the invitation, then at Simone's name on her phone screen. And Ella Mark, granddaughter Dr. Miriam Mark, former voice of the voiceless, current invisible woman, made a choice. She pressed call. Drop a crown if you believe everyone deserves to be seen, regardless of their job title. Pride can keep you small. But sometimes asking for help is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Ella's thumb hovered over the contact name, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Maron Luxury. 2 words. 10 letters. 3 years of silence compressed into a name on a screen. The phone felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it should be, weighted down by shame and pride and all the reasons she convinced herself not to make this call for 1,000 days. She could still see Simone at the funeral, could still feel that moment like it was yesterday instead of 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the funeral home had been packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, spilling out into the hallway. Dr. Miriam Mark had touched that many lives, had mattered to that many people. Ella had stood at the front, barely 22 years old, wearing a black dress that her grandmother had bought her for her college graduation. She'd given a eulogy she couldn't remember writing, spoken words she couldn't remember saying. Everything had been blurred by grief, underwater and distant. After the service, after the burial, after the reception where people ate finger sandwiches and told stories about the brilliant Dr. Mark, Ella had found herself alone in a corner, exhausted, hollowed out, trying to figure out how to exist in a world without her grandmother's presence. That's when Simone had found her. Simone Luxury had been Miriam's best friend for 40 years. They'd met in the 1970s at a civil rights conference, 2 young women of color refusing to be silent in rooms that wanted them invisible. They'd fought battles together, celebrated victories together, survived defeats together. Simone had gone into fashion, using her platform to advocate for diversity and representation. Miriam had gone into law, fighting for justice in courtrooms. Different paths, same mission. Making space for people who'd been told they didn't belong. Simone had been in her 60s then, elegant and powerful with silver hair she wore like a crown. She'd pulled Ella into a hug that felt like being held together when everything inside was falling apart. "Baby," she'd said, her voice thick with her own grief. I know you're drowning right now. I know everything feels impossible. Ella had nodded against her shoulder, unable to speak. But you don't have to do this alone, Simone had continued, pulling back to look Ella in the eyes. Whatever you need. Money, connections, a place to stay, someone to help run the foundation. Whatever you need, I'm here. Your grandmother was my sister in every way that matters. That makes you family. She'd pressed a business card into Ella's hand. Call me. Anytime. Day or night. I mean that. Ella had taken the card. Had even saved Simone's number in her phone. But she never called. Pride wouldn't let her. Shame wouldn't let her. The voice in her head that said you should be able to do this alone. You're weak if you ask for help. You're a failure if you can't handle it wouldn't let her. She watched the foundation collapse. Watched her life fall apart. Watched herself disappear. And she'd done it all alone because asking for help felt like admitting defeat. Over the 3 years, Simone had tried to reach out. Text messages at first. Thinking of you, baby. How are you doing? Then phone calls that Ella let go to voicemail. Then eventually, silence when Simone got the message that Ella didn't want to be found. Now, sitting in her tiny apartment with photographs of her past spread across the table and an invitation to her own humiliation in her hand, Ella understood something she hadn't understood at 22. Asking for help wasn't weakness. Suffering alone was. Her thumb still hovered over the call button. Her heart hammered in her chest. Her breath came quick and shallow. What if she's angry? What if she's moved on? What if 3 years is too long? But then her eyes fell on the photograph of her grandmother, smiling in that purple suit, and she heard Miriam's voice in her memory. Pride is just fear wearing a fancy dress, baby. Don't let it keep you small. Ella took a deep breath. She pressed call. The phone rang. Once. Ella's heart lurched. She could still hang up. She could pretend this never happened. She could. Twice. Her hand tightened around the phone. Her other hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heart trying to escape her ribcage. Maybe Simone wouldn't answer. Maybe she'd see Ella's name and let it go to voicemail, the way Ella had done to her for 3 years. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe 3 times. Ella almost hung up. Her thumb moved toward the red button. Hello. The voice froze her. Warm, slightly raspy from years of commanding design studios and fashion shows. Familiar in a way that made Ella's eyes immediately burn with tears. Hello. Simone said again, more uncertain now. Is someone there? Ella opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed up, compressed by 3 years of silence and shame and the overwhelming relief of hearing that voice again. She managed. Just that one sound, cracked and broken. A pause on the other end. Then, softly, with wonder and something that might have been hope, Ella? The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. Ella pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in her chest, but it escaped anyway, a broken, desperate sound. Oh, baby, Simone breathed. Oh, my sweet baby girl. It's okay. I'm here. It's okay. I'm sorry, Ella choked out. I'm so sorry. I should have called. I'm sorry. Stop, Simone said firmly but gently. Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare. I disappeared. I pushed you away. You were grieving. You were 22 years old, and the world fell on your shoulders. You did what you had to do to survive. Simone's voice cracked slightly. I've been waiting, Ella. Every day for 3 years. I've been waiting for you to be ready. You have. Of course I have. You're Miriam's granddaughter. You're my family. That doesn't change just because you needed time. Ella sank onto her bed. The phone pressed her ear like a lifeline. The tears kept coming, but they felt different now. Not just grief and shame, but relief. The overwhelming relief of not being alone anymore. Simone, she whispered, I need help. Tell me. So Ella did. The words tumbled out in a rush. The job at the hotel, the daily humiliations, Evelyn Maron's cruelty, the invitation designed to mock her, the black tie requirement, the trap she'd walked into. She told Simone about cleaning toilets in the same building where she used to attend galas as an honored guest, about being invisible, about forgetting who she used to be. Simone listened without interrupting, but Ella could hear her breathing change, could feel her anger building to the phone line. "So this woman," Simone said when Ella finished, her voice carefully controlled, "this cruel, small-minded woman invited you to her party for the explicit purpose of humiliating you in front of high society?" "Yes," Ella said quietly. "And it's this Saturday? Black tie." "Yes." A pause. Then Simone laughed. Not with humor, but with the dark satisfaction of someone who's just been handed an opportunity for beautiful justice. "Oh, baby," she said. "Oh, you did the right thing calling me. I don't have money for a dress. Simone, I can barely afford." "Stop. Just stop right there." Simone's voice was firm. "Money is not the issue. It has never been the issue. This isn't about a dress, Ella. This is about reminding them, and reminding you of who you really are." Ella's breath caught. "I'm coming," Simone said, and Ella could hear movement on the other end, doors opening, keys jingling. "Right now, tonight, where are you living?" Ella gave her the address, embarrassment flooding through her. It's not a nice neighborhood. The building is kind of... I don't care if you're living in a cardboard box. I'm coming. Text me the apartment number. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes? But it's almost 9 p.m. and I'm across the city. 15 minutes if traffic's good, Simone corrected. I drive fast when I'm on a mission. And baby, her voice softened, I'm so glad you called. I've missed you. Ella's throat tightened again. I've missed you too. We're going to fix this, Simone promised. Not just the dress situation. All of it. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Now put some coffee on or find me something caffeinated. We have work to do. I'll be there soon. She hung up. Ella sat on her bed, phone still pressed to her ear, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The next morning, because Simone's 20 minutes had turned into 11 p.m. after traffic, and Ella had insisted she not drive that late, and they'd talked on the phone for another hour planning. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of Ella's building. The car looked like a UFO that had landed in the wrong neighborhood. Around it, children played in the street, their basketball game pausing to stare. Men sitting on the stoop, drinking morning beers, stopped mid-conversation. A woman sweeping her front steps froze with her broom in the air. The driver's door opened. Simone Laurent stepped out like she owned the cracked sidewalk and the crumbling buildings and the whole struggling neighborhood. At 68 years old, she moved with the grace and power of someone who'd spent 50 years refusing to apologize for taking up space. Her hair was pure silver, cut in a sharp bob that framed her face like a crown. She wore a charcoal suit that was somehow both casual and powerful. Perfectly tailored, obviously expensive, but understated enough that it didn't scream wealth, just whispered it confidently. Her makeup was minimal but perfect. Her jewelry was simple, small diamond studs, a thin gold watch. She looked like money, like power, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and fashion shows and places where decisions that changed lives got made. She looked nothing like someone who should be standing on this street, in this neighborhood. But she looked entirely like someone who'd go anywhere for family. Simone locked her car, which would probably be fine because even the toughest neighborhood respected people who carried themselves with that much confident authority, and walked toward the building. Her heels clicked against the pavement with purpose. Ella watched from her fourth-floor window, her heart in her throat. Simone looked up, somehow knowing exactly which window to look at, and smiled. Then she made an exaggerated gesture like, well, are you going to let me in or what? Ella ran down the 4 flights of stairs. The elevator was still broken, and pushed open a heavy front door. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 3 years. 3 years of silence and shame and survival. 3 years of Ella trying to disappear, and Simone waiting for her to resurface. Hi, baby, Simone said softly. That was all it took. Ella stepped forward, and Simone met her halfway, pulling her into a hug that felt like being put back together after being broken for so long. Strong arms, familiar perfume, the The feeling of being held by someone who saw you, really saw you, and loved what they saw. "I've got you," Simone whispered into Ella's hair. "I've got you now. You're not alone anymore." Ella didn't realize she was crying again until she felt the tears soaking into Simone's expensive suit. But Simone didn't seem to care. She just held tighter. When they finally pulled apart, Simone framed Ella's face with both hands, studying her with eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired," she said, "worn down, like you've been carrying the world by yourself." Her thumbs brushed away Ella's tears. "But I can still see her in there. That brilliant young woman who was going to change the world. She's still there, isn't she?" Ella nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good," Simone said firmly. "Then let's wake her up." They climbed the 4 flights together, Simone not even slightly winded, her heels clicking determination with every step. Inside the tiny apartment, Simone looked around, taking the single room, the small kitchenette, the bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and her expression softened. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said gently. "It's not much," Ella said, embarrassed. "It's what you could manage," Simone corrected. "And there's no shame in that. Your grandmother lived in a place half this size when she first started law school. She used to tell me she could touch all 4 walls from her bed." She smiled at the memory. "Location doesn't determine worth, baby. People do." She set her purse down on the table, next to the photographs that were still spread out from last night. Her eyes fell on the picture of Miriam in her purple suit, and her breath caught. She picked it up with careful hands, like it was made of glass. "God, I miss her," she whispered. Then to Ella, "Do you remember this day?" The foundation opening. "Every detail," Ella said. "She was so proud of you. You know that, right?" Simone set the photo down gently. "Every time we talked, it was Ella this, Ella that. My brilliant granddaughter. My legacy." "I failed that legacy," Ella said quietly. "No." Simone turned to her, voice sharp. "No, you didn't. You were 22 and drowning in grief, and the system failed you. The people who should have helped failed you. But you survived. That takes more strength than most people will ever understand." She picked up the cream-colored invitation next, reading it with narrowed eyes. Her jaw tightened with each word. "So this is the trap," she said finally. "Yes. Black tie. Grand Bellwood Estate. This Saturday." Simone looked up, and she did this because she's cruel, because she can, because I'm invisible to her, just the cleaning lady who doesn't matter. Ella swallowed hard, because she wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone who matters in this city. Simone set down the invitation very carefully. Her face was calm, but Ella could see the storm building behind her eyes. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, then." She pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Ella asked. "Making calls." Simone was already dialing. "Marcus? It's Simone. I need you to clear my schedule for the next 5 days. Yes, all of it. Cancel the Los Angeles trip. Tell them it's a family emergency. Because it is. No, everyone's fine, but I have something more important than trunk shows and meetings." She hung up, dialed again. "Genevieve, I need a favor. Big one. You still have access to that fabric supplier in Milan?" "Perfect. I need something by Wednesday." "Yes, I know that's impossible. Do it anyway. Send me the invoice, whatever it costs." Another call. "Antoine, baby, I need your magic. Saturday night. Full treatment. Hair, makeup, the works. I know you're booked. Unbook it. Trust me. You're going to want to be part of this." She hung up and looked at Ella with a smile that was equal parts love and warrior determination. 5 days, she said. "We have 5 days to create a queen." Ella's eyes widened. "Simone, I can't afford." Simone held up one finger, silencing her. "This isn't about money," she said firmly. "This isn't about dresses or hair or makeup. This is about legacy. Your grandmother's legacy. Your legacy. The legacy of every woman who's ever been told she doesn't matter, that she's invisible, that she should know her place." She took Ella's hands. "That woman, Evelyn, She invited you to her party because she wanted to make you small. She wanted to remind you that you're nothing but the help, that you don't belong in her world. Simone's grip tightened. We're going to walk into that party, and you're going to remind her of something she's forgotten. That dignity isn't about money or position. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. And baby, you are Dr. Miriam Mark's granddaughter. You are a voice for the voiceless. You are a woman who has survived things that would break most people. Her eyes blaze with fierce love. We're not going there to prove anything to them. We're going there to remind you of who you've always been. Ella felt tears burning again, but this time they were different. Not grief or shame, but something that felt like strength returning to bones that had been brittle too long. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Simone smiled. Just okay? Ella stood straighter, her grandmother's backbone finally remembering how to be a spine. Let's do it, she said, voice stronger. Let's show them who I really am. Simone pulled her into another hug, fierce and quick. That's my girl, she said. Now let's get to work. We have a queen to create. Sometimes we all need a Simone. Tag someone who's been your Simone in the comments below. What's about to happen next? You're not ready for this transformation. Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been. Simone's studio was located in the Arts District, in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into something between a fashion house and an art gallery. The outside was still industrial brick and steel beams, but inside was magic. Ella stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. The space was massive. High ceilings with exposed ductwork painted matte black, polished concrete floors that reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. One entire wall was lined with racks of gowns, organized by color, like a rainbow made of silk and chiffon and velvet. Another wall displayed sketches and mood boards from Simone's 50-year career. And in the center stood several dress forms wearing partially completed designs, works in progress frozen mid-creation. Welcome to my sanctuary, Simone said, flipping on additional lights. This is where the magic happens. She dressed politicians here, activists preparing for major speeches, brides who wanted something that represented their truth rather than tradition, women who needed to feel powerful, who needed armor disguised as beauty. I haven't brought anyone here in months, Simone continued, walking deeper into the space. Most of my work now is consultations and special projects. But for you, she turned, smiling. For you, we pull out everything. Ella followed her past the racks of dresses, her fingers trailing lightly over fabrics that probably cost more than she made in a year. Silk that felt like water, velvet that absorbed light, organza that seemed to float without being touched. The key to this, Simone said, pulling out a rolling rack and beginning to select specific gowns, is that we're not trying to make you look like someone else. We're not creating a costume or playing dress-up. We're finding the external expression of who you already are internally. She pulled out a deep purple gown, obviously a nod to Miriam's signature color, and held up to Ella, studying the effect. Your grandmother always said that what you wear is a form of communication. It tells people who you are before you say a single word. She put the purple dress aside. So the question isn't what should you wear? The question is, what do you want to say? Ella thought about that, about Evelyn expecting her to show up looking cheap, desperate, out of place, about walking into a room full of people who thought she was nobody, about the message she wanted to send. I want to say, she began slowly, that I belong, that I've always belonged, that their opinion of me never mattered because I know who I am. Simone's smile widened. Perfect. Then we're looking for something that communicates quiet power. Not loud, not desperate for attention, not trying too hard. Something that makes people look twice because they can't help themselves, not because you're demanding they notice you. She moved through the racks with the confidence of someone who dressed thousands of women and knew exactly what worked. She pulled out several options: a sleek black gown with gold threading, an emerald dress with an asymmetrical neckline, a champagne-colored dress with intricate beading. But when she reached the rack in the far corner, the pieces she designed for herself, for special occasions, for moments when she needed to make a statement, she stopped. Oh, she breathed. Oh, this is it. She pulled out a gown that made Ella's breath catch. Gold, not bright, screaming gold, but a deeper shade, like honey catching sunlight, like the golden hour right before sunset. The dress was deceptively simple, a sleeveless design with a V-neck that was elegant without being revealing, a fitted bodice that flowed into a floor-length skirt. But the fabric was extraordinary. It shimmered when it moved, catching light and releasing it, making the dress look like it was glowing from within. This, Simone said, holding it up, was for a gallery opening 5 years ago. I wore it once and then couldn't bear to wear it again because it felt too special, too perfect for that one moment. I've been saving it, though I didn't know what for. She looked at Ella. I think I've been saving it for you. Simone, I can't. Try it on, Simone interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. Just try it on. In the dressing room, a curtained corner with a three-way mirror, Ella stripped down to her underwear, suddenly self-conscious of her body. 3 years of physical labor had left her stronger but thinner, her curves less pronounced, her skin marked by the occasional bruise from bumping into cleaning carts. But when she slipped the dress over her head and Simone zipped it up, everything else fell away. The dress fit like it had been made for her. The bodice hugged her torso perfectly. The skirt skimmed her hips and fell in a straight line to the floor. The color made her skin glow, made her look radiant even under the harsh dressing room lights. Ella stepped out to the three-way mirror and barely recognized herself. Oh, baby, Simone whispered, her hand going to her mouth. Oh, my God. Ella turned slowly, watching the dress shimmer and flow with each movement. It wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming for attention, but it was undeniably powerful. Quietly, absolutely powerful. Ella couldn't find the words. Like a queen, Simone finished. You look like a queen. Tears burned in Ella's eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to ruin this moment with crying. Simone circled her, assessing with the designer's critical eye. She tugged slightly at the shoulders, adjusted the way the skirt fell, made mental notes about minor alterations. The hemline needs to come up 1/2 inch, she muttered, pulling pins from a cushion strapped to her wrist. And we'll take in the waist just a touch. You're smaller than I was when I wore this. But otherwise... She stepped back, smiling. Otherwise, it's perfect. How much do I owe you? Ella asked quietly. Simone's eyes snapped to hers in the mirror. Excuse me? For the dress. For your time. For... Stop. Simone moved to stand behind Ella, meeting her eyes in the mirror. This isn't transaction. This isn't business. This is family. Your grandmother would have done the same for any daughter of mine. Hell, she did do the same countless times, helping people who needed it. So you don't owe me anything except a promise that you'll walk into that party with your head high. Ella's throat tightened. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't thank me. Just let me do this. Let me honor Miriam's memory by taking care of her granddaughter the way she would have wanted. Simone squeezed her shoulders. Besides, this is going to be fun. I haven't taken down a mean girl in years. The next morning, Ella arrived at the studio at 8 a.m. to find Simone already there with coffee and a tall, elegant man who looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Ella, this is Antoine, Simone introduced, the best hairstylist in the city and a dear friend. Antoine, this is a young woman I told you about. Antoine circled Ella slowly, studying her natural hair, which she'd been wearing pulled back in a simple bun for work, with the intensity of an artist examining a canvas. Oh, honey, he said, his voice melodious with a French accent. What have you been doing to this beautiful hair? Surviving, Ella said honestly. He softened immediately. Well, survival time is over. Now it's time to thrive. He ran his fingers gently through her hair, testing its texture and curl pattern. You have gorgeous natural texture. We're not fighting it, we're celebrating it. Simone showed me pictures of your grandmother. She wore her hair natural too, didn't she? Yes, Ella said. She used to say her hair was her crown. Smart woman. And you're going to wear your crown just like she did. Antoine pulled out his phone, showing her inspiration photos. I'm thinking big, voluminous, unapologetic curls. Styled up and back, like you're wearing an actual crown. Natural, powerful you. Over the next 2 days, Antoine worked his magic. He taught Ella about her curl pattern, about proper moisture and technique, about embracing what she'd been trained by the world to see as unprofessional or unkempt. He did practice styles, perfecting the technique, making sure Ella understood that her natural hair wasn't something to hide or straighten or apologize for. It was part of her power. When you walk into that room, Antoine said as he worked, and they see this hair, this big, natural, unapologetic black woman's hair, some of them are going to have opinions. Some of them are going to think you should have straightened it, should have made yourself more polished, more palatable to their white gaze. He met her eyes in the mirror. That's exactly why we're not straightening it, because your crown doesn't need their permission to exist. While Antoine worked on hair, Simone focused on everything else. Jewelry. She opened a vault in her office that made Ella gasp. Decades of collected pieces, some costume, some real, all beautiful. She selected simple gold earrings, long and slim, that would catch the light without overwhelming. A thin gold bracelet. And a necklace. A single pendant on a delicate chain. A small topaz stone that matched the dress. Nothing too loud, Simone explained. Nothing that screams. Everything should whisper power. Shoes. Gold heels, for inches high but surprisingly comfortable, with ankle straps for stability. You need to be able to walk with confidence, Simone said. If you're wobbling or in pain, it shows. These will let you move like you own the space. But the most important work wasn't external. It was internal. Simone made Ella walk, not just across the studio, but walk, chin up, shoulders back, eyes forward. Made her practice sitting down with grace, standing up with authority, moving through space like she had every right to be there. You walk like you're apologizing, Simone said on day 3, watching Ella #ACT1. The invisible woman. Have you ever felt invisible? Not ignored. Truly invisible, like you're not even human enough to acknowledge? That was Ella Mark's life. Until one cruel invitation changed everything. The alarm screamed at 4:15 a.m., the same way it did every morning. Ella's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it before the second beep in the darkness of her studio apartment. She could hear the pipes rattling the walls, the neighbor's television bleeding through cheap drywall, and the distant wail of sirens that never seemed to stop in this part of the city. She didn't need light to navigate her morning routine. Her body knew the choreography by heart. Feet on cold linoleum, 3 steps to bathroom, shower with water that took 5 minutes to warm up. She dressed in the dark, the same gray uniform she'd worn yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the past 3 years. It hung loose on her frame, 2 sizes too big, with her name stitched crookedly on the chest pocket in fading red thread, Ella. By 4:50 a.m., she was on the first of 3 buses that would carry her across the city, from a neighborhood where rent was cheap and hope was cheaper, to the gleaming district where buildings touched clouds and people touched money. The Maron Luxury Hotel rose 37 stories into the sky, all glass and steel and architectural audacity. It was the kind of place that appeared in travel magazines with words like opulent, exclusive, and unparalleled luxury. The lobby alone could have housed Ella's entire apartment building. Marble floors imported from Italy caught the light from crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything gleamed. Everything sparkled. Everything whispered the same message. You don't belong here. But Ella did belong here, just not in the way the guests did. At exactly 5 a.m., she pushed through the service entrance, never the front doors, always the back, and clocked it with the car that identified her as employee number 2847. The staff locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and tired dreams. She pulled her cleaning cart from storage. The squeaky front wheel that never got fixed, the mop with a handle wrapped in duct tape, the bottles of solution that made her eyes water. Her hands gripped the cart handle. 25 years old, but her hands told a different story. They were rough, calloused, marked by years of scrubbing and cleaning and surviving. Hands that had held scholarship letters and graduation, diplomas, now held mops and rags. She looked at them sometimes and barely recognized them as her own. The hotel was just beginning to wake up. Early morning joggers returned from runs, their designer workout clothes still crisp and perfect. Business executives headed to power breakfast, briefcases worth more than Ella's monthly rent swinging at their sides. A couple in matching robes glided toward the spa, laughing about something Ella would never understand. She pushed her cart down the hall, and they flowed around her like water around a stone. Not one of them looked at her face. Not one of them saw her as human. She was part of the building, like the furniture or the fixtures, necessary for function, irrelevant for acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Ella murmured, moving her car aside as a man in a $1,000 suit barreled past, eyes on his phone, not even registering that she'd spoken. This was her life. This was survival. By 7 a.m., Ella had cleaned 4 rooms and 3 hallways. Her back already ached. Her knees already protested, but there were 23 more rooms on her list. She learned early that if you stayed quiet and kept moving, the day passed faster. If you made yourself small enough, you could almost disappear. But sometimes, people made sure you knew you were there. Finally, a woman snapped as Ella approached room 1847. The woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a silk robe that probably cost what Ella made in a month. "I've been waiting for housekeeping for 10 minutes. Do you people not understand urgency?" "I apologize, ma'am," Ella said softly, eyes down. "What can I help you with?" "The coffee maker isn't working." "Fix it." Ella stepped inside. The coffee maker was unplugged. She bent down, pushed the plug into the outlet, and pressed the power button. It hummed to life. "It just needed to be plugged in, ma'am." The woman stared at her like Ella had insulted her entire lineage. "Well, someone should have made sure it was plugged in before I checked in. This is unacceptable." She turned away, dismissing Ella with a wave of her hand. "You can go." "No, thank you." No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. Ella pushed her cart to the next floor. At 9:30 a.m., she was cleaning the hallway near the executive suites when 2 women walked past, designer shopping bags hanging from their arms, expensive perfume trailing behind them like toxic clouds. "I'm telling you, the service here has really gone downhill," one said, voice carrying clearly. She didn't bother lowering it, didn't care that Ella was 5 feet away. "I had to ask 3 times for extra towels yesterday." "I know," the other one agreed, eyeing Ella's cart with distaste. "And make sure she doesn't touch your luggage when she comes to clean. You never know with these people." These people. Ella's hands tightened on the mop handle. Her jaw clenched. Her stomach twisted with familiar shame and rage and helplessness all braided together. But she kept her face neutral, her eyes down, her body small. Bills don't care about pride, she reminded herself. Survival first. Always survival first. The women walked away, their laughter echoing down the corridor like breaking glass. By noon, Ella had learned to recognize the different types of invisible she could be. There was the invisible where people looked through her, past her, around her, like she was a ghost they couldn't quite see. There was the invisible where people saw her but refused to acknowledge her humanity, like she was a robot programmed only for cleaning. And there was the worst kind of invisible, where people saw her, acknowledged her, but only to remind her of her place. She was wiping down the marble railing on the second-floor balcony when a family passed by. Mother, father, 2 children. The little boy, maybe 7 years old, looked at Ella and smiled. "Hi," he said brightly. Ella felt something crack in her chest. A smile, genuine and warm, started to form on her face. "Hi there. Jacob, come here." The mother grabbed the boy's hand, pulling him away. She looked at Ella with something cold and flat in her eyes. Not anger. Worse. Indifference. Like Ella was a stray dog the child shouldn't interact with. The boy looked confused. "But Mom, I said come here." They walked away. The boy glanced back once, still confused about what he'd done wrong. Ella turned back to the railing. She scrubbed harder than necessary, the motion giving her somewhere but the feeling building in her chest. She had learned, over these 3 years, how to swallow anger, how to compress hurt into something small and manageable, how to survive by making herself smaller and smaller until she almost disappeared. This is temporary, she told herself, like she told herself every day, this isn't forever. This isn't who you are. But some days, it was hard to remember who she used to be. At 2:47 p.m., Ella heard them before she saw them. Laughter, sharp and bright and expensive, echoing down the marble hallway, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. The rustle of designer fabric and the clink of champagne glasses carried from the hotel bar. Ella knew that sound. She felt her shoulders tense automatically, her body preparing for impact. Evelyn Maron swept around the corner like a hurricane in Chanel. 26 years old, blonde hair styled in perfect waves, skin that glowed with the kind of radiance that came from monthly spa treatments and zero stress. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged every calculated curve, heels that cost more than Ella's rent, and jewelry that caught the light with aggressive sparkle. Behind her came her entourage, 3 women cut from the same cloth, all designer labels and manufactured beauty and inherited confidence. They moved through the world like they owned it, because, in many ways, they did. Evelyn Maron wasn't just beautiful. She was cruel, and she had been cruel to Ella since the first day they'd met. Most people ignored Ella. Evelyn noticed her, and that was so much worse. "Oh, perfect!" Evelyn announced loudly, stopping directly in Ella's path. "The cleaning lady is here. Girls, we can finally get this hallway properly sanitized." Her friends giggled. One of them wrinkled her nose at Ella's cart. Ella stepped aside, eyes down, saying nothing. "Careful with that mop," Evelyn continued, gesturing at the marble floor with one manicure hand. "This marble costs more than you'll make in your entire life. Imported from Tuscany. But you probably don't know where that is, do you?" "I know where Tuscany is, ma'am," Ella said quietly. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Did I ask you a question?" Ella's mouth closed. Her hands gripped the mop tighter. Everyone in the hotel knew Evelyn's story, even if they pretended not to gossip about it. She'd married Jade Maron 6 months ago in a ceremony that made national news. Jade was 90 years old, a real estate billionaire who'd built half the city's skyline. Evelyn was his 3rd wife, young enough to be his great-granddaughter. The math wasn't complicated. Neither was the motivation. Jade Maron owned this hotel, which meant Evelyn owned it too, which meant Ella was at her mercy every single day. "You know," Evelyn said, circling Ella slowly like a predator studying prey, "I've been thinking about you." Ella's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from Evelyn thinking about her. "Have you?" Ella managed to keep her voice neutral. Evelyn tilted her head, studying Ella with those cold blue eyes. "You work so hard. You're here every day, so dedicated. It's almost admirable. In a simple, uncomplicated way." Her friends laughed on cue, and Ella felt a familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. But she kept her face carefully blank, refusing to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her pain. The heels clicked closer, and then Evelyn reached into her designer purse, pulling out something that would change everything. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible at work? How did you handle it? They expected a joke. They got a revolution. The Grand Bellwood Estate wasn't just a venue. It was a statement. Built in 1927 by a railroad magnate who wanted to prove he belonged among old money aristocrats, the mansion sprawled across 5 acres of manicured grounds in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. White stone gleamed in the evening light. 3 stories of architectural excess topped with a slate roof and copper gutters that had aged to a distinguished green patina. 16 Corinthian columns supported the front portico. 12 balconies overlooked the circular driveway. Endless windows, each one taller than most people, glowed with warm light from the crystal chandeliers visible inside. The kind of chandeliers that cost 6 figures. The kind that required structural reinforcement because they were so heavy with crystal and gold. This was where the wealthy came to prove they were wealthy, where power came to see and be seen. The circular driveway was clogged with cars that cost more than houses. Rolls-Royces in midnight blue and pearl white. Bentleys with custom paint jobs. Maybachs with interiors wrapped in leather that came from cows raised specifically for luxury vehicles. A few Ferraris and Lamborghinis from younger money that wanted to announce their arrival with engine noise rather than quiet wealth. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed from car to car, handling keys to vehicles they'd never be able to afford, opening doors for people who'd never learned to open their own. Tips exchanged hands. 20s and 50s treated like pocket change because at an event like this, even the help got premium treatment. Not out of kindness, but because generosity was another way to display wealth. The red carpet stretched from the driveway to the massive double doors at the entrance, lined with velvet ropes and photographers who'd been hired to document every arrival. Not paparazzi. These were legitimate society photographers whose images would appear in the lifestyle sections of newspapers and magazines, proof that you'd attended, that you mattered, that you belonged. Classical music floated from inside, a string quartet playing something baroque and expensive sounding. Through the windows, Ella could see the first floor of the mansion, a grand foyer with a double staircase that curved up to the second floor, walls covered in oil paintings and silk wallpaper, marble floors that reflected the chandelier light like mirrors. And guests, dozens of them already, maybe 100, women in gowns that cost what most people paid in rent for a year. Valentino, Versace, Dior, custom couture from designers whose names were whispered like prayers. Men in tuxedos so perfectly tailored they looked like they'd been born wearing them. Jewelry that sparkled under the lights. Diamonds, emeralds, sapphires. Stones that had their own insurance policies. Laughter and conversation spilled out into the evening. The sound of people who'd never worry about money, never stress about bills, never understood what it meant to choose between food and rent. This was the world Ella used to know, not intimately. Her grandmother had never been wealthy, but tangentially. She'd attended events like this as Dr. Miriam Mark's granddaughter, as a rising activist, as someone who mattered in civic circles even if she couldn't afford the dress she was wearing. And she'd been exiled from it 3 years ago when she lost everything. Now she was returning, not as a supplicant, not as a help, not as someone grateful to be included. She was returning as herself. The black Mercedes rolled to a stop at the edge of the red carpet. Through the tinted windows, Ella could see a valet approaching, his expression curious. The car was nice enough to belong, but he didn't recognize it. His job was to know which cars belonged to which wealthy families, and this one was a mystery. In the back seat, Simone gave Ella's hand one final squeeze. "Remember everything we talked about," she said softly. "You belong here. You've always belonged here. Their opinion doesn't change that. What if You won't. And if you do, you'll handle it. But you won't." Simone's eyes were fierce with love and confidence. "Now go remind them who you are." The driver opened Ella's door. The sound of the party, music, laughter, conversation, rushed in like a wave. And Ella Mark stepped out. Inside the grand ballroom on the mansion's second floor, Evelyn Maron stood at the center of everything, exactly where she belonged. Her gown was a masterpiece, custom Vera Wang, ordered 6 months ago, fitted 3 times to achieve absolute perfection. White silk with subtle shimmer, a structured bodice that made her waist look impossibly small, a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. Have you ever felt invisible? Not ignored. Truly invisible, like you're not even human enough to acknowledge? That was Ella Mark's life. Until one cruel invitation changed everything. The alarm screamed at 4:15 a.m., the same way it did every morning. Ella's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it before the second beep in the darkness of her studio apartment. She could hear the pipes rattling in the walls, the neighbor's television bleeding through cheap drywall, and the distant wail of sirens that never seemed to stop in this part of the city. She didn't need light to navigate her morning routine. Her body knew the choreography by heart. Feet on cold linoleum, 3 steps to the bathroom, shower with water that took 5 minutes to warm up. She dressed in the dark. The same gray uniform she'd worn yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the past 3 years. It hung loose on her frame, 2 sizes too big, with her name stitched crookedly on the chest pocket in fading red thread. Ella. By 4:50 a.m., she was on the first of 3 buses that would carry her across the city, from the neighborhood where rent was cheap and hope was cheaper, to the gleaming district where buildings touched clouds and people touched money. The Maron Luxury Hotel rose 37 stories into the sky, all glass and steel and architectural audacity. It was the kind of place that appeared in travel magazines with words like opulent, exclusive, and unparalleled luxury. The lobby alone could have housed Ella's entire apartment building. Marble floors imported from Italy caught the light from crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything gleamed. Everything sparkled. Everything whispered the same message. You don't belong here. But Ella did belong here, just not in the way the guests did. At exactly 5 a.m., she pushed through the service entrance, never the front doors, always the back, and clocked with a car that identified her as employee number 2847. The staff locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and tired dreams. She pulled her cleaning cart from storage. The squeaky front wheel that never got fixed, the mop with a handle wrapped in duct tape, the bottles of solution that made her eyes water. Her hands gripped the cart handle. 25 years old, but her hands told a different story. They were rough, calloused, marked by years of scrubbing and cleaning and surviving. Hands that had held scholarship letters and graduation diplomas now held mops and rags. She looked at them sometimes and barely recognized them as her own. The hotel was just beginning to wake up. Early morning joggers returned from runs, their designer workout clothes still crisp and perfect. Business executives headed to power breakfast, briefcases worth more than Ella's monthly rent swinging at their sides. A couple in matching robes glided toward the spa, laughing about something Ella would never understand. She pushed her cart down the hall, and they flowed around her like water around a stone. Not one of them looked at her face. Not one of them saw her as human. She was part of the building, like the furniture or the fixtures, necessary for function, irrelevant for acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Ella murmured, moving her cart aside as a man in a $1,000 suit barreled past, eyes on his phone, not even registering that she'd spoken. This was her life. This was survival. By 7 a.m., Ella had cleaned 4 rooms and 3 hallways. Her back already ached. Her knees already protested. But there were 23 more rooms on her list. She learned early that if you stayed quiet and kept moving, the day passed faster. If you made yourself small enough, you could almost disappear. But sometimes, people made sure you knew you were there. Finally, a woman snapped as Ella approached room 1847. The woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a silk robe that probably cost what Ella made in a month. "I've been waiting for housekeeping for 10 minutes. Do you people not understand urgency?" "I apologize, ma'am," Ella said softly, eyes down. "What can I help you with?" "The coffee maker isn't working." "Fix it." Ella stepped inside. The coffee maker was unplugged. She bent down, pushed the plug into the outlet, and pressed the power button. It hummed to life. "It just needed to be plugged in, ma'am." The woman stared at her like Ella had insulted her entire lineage. "Well, someone should have made sure it was plugged in before I checked in. This is unacceptable." She turned away, dismissing Ella with a wave of her hand. "You can go." No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. Ella pushed her cart to the next floor. At 9:30 a.m., she was cleaning the hallway near the executive suites when 2 women walked past, designer shopping bags hanging from their arms, expensive perfume trailing behind them like toxic clouds. "I'm telling you, the service here has really gone downhill," one said, voice carrying clearly. She didn't bother lowering it, didn't care that Ella was 5 feet away. "I had to ask 3 times for extra towels yesterday." "I know," the other one agreed, eyeing Ella's cart with distaste. "And make sure she doesn't touch your luggage when she comes to clean. You never know with these people." These people. Ella's hands tightened on the mop handle. Her jaw clenched. Her stomach twisted with familiar shame and rage and helplessness all braided together. But she kept her face neutral, her eyes down, her body small. Bills don't care about pride, she reminded herself. Survival first. Always survival first. The women walked away, their laughter echoing down the corridor like breaking glass. By noon, Ella had learned to recognize the different types of invisible she could be. There was the invisible where people looked through her, past her, around her, like she was a ghost they couldn't quite see. There was the invisible where people saw her but refused to acknowledge her humanity, like she was a robot programmed only for cleaning. And there was the worst kind of invisible, where people saw her, acknowledged her, but only to remind her of her place. She was wiping down the marble railing on the second-floor balcony when a family passed by. Mother, father, 2 children. The little boy, maybe 7 years old, looked at Ella and smiled. "Hi," he said brightly. Ella felt something crack in her chest. A smile, genuine and warm, started to form on her face. "Hi there. Jacob, come here." The mother grabbed the boy's hand, pulling him away. She looked at Ella with something cold and flat in her eyes. Not anger. Worse. Indifference. Like Ella was a stray dog the child should interact with. The boy looked confused. "But, Mom, I said come here." They walked away. The boy glanced back once, still confused about what he'd done wrong. Ella turned back to the railing. She scrubbed harder than necessary, the motion giving her somewhere but the feeling building in her chest. She had learned, over these 3 years, how to swallow anger, how to compress hurt into something small and manageable, how to survive by making herself smaller and smaller until she almost disappeared. This is temporary, she told herself, like she told herself every day. This isn't forever. This isn't who you are. But some days, it was hard to remember who she used to be. At 2:47 p.m., Ella heard them before she saw them. Laughter, sharp and bright and expensive, echoing down the marble hallway, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. The rustle of designer fabric and the clink of champagne glasses carried from the hotel bar. Ella knew that sound. She felt her shoulders tense automatically, her body preparing for impact. Evelyn Maron swept around the corner like a hurricane in Chanel. 26 years old, blonde hair styled in perfect waves, skin that glowed with the kind of radiance that came from monthly spa treatments and zero stress. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged every calculated curve, heels that cost more than Ella's rent, and jewelry that caught the light with aggressive sparkle. Behind her came her entourage. 3 women cut from the same cloth, all designer labels and manufactured beauty and inherited confidence. They moved the world like they owned it, because in many ways they did. Evelyn Maron wasn't just beautiful. She was cruel, and she had been cruel to Ella since the first day they'd met. Most people ignored Ella. Evelyn noticed her, and that was so much worse. "Oh, perfect," Evelyn announced loudly, stopping directly in Ella's path. "The cleaning lady is here. Girls, we can finally get this hallway properly sanitized." Her friends giggled. One of them wrinkled her nose at Ella's cart. Ella stepped aside, eyes down, saying nothing. "Careful with that mop," Evelyn continued, gesturing at the marble floor with one manicured hand. "This marble costs more than you'll make in your entire life. Imported from Tuscany. But you probably don't know where that is, do you?" "I know where Tuscany is, ma'am," Ella said quietly. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Did I ask you a question?" Ella's mouth closed. Her hands gripped the mop tighter. Everyone in the hotel knew Evelyn's story, even if they pretended not to gossip about it. She'd married Jade Maron 6 months ago in a ceremony that made national news. Jade was 90 years old, a real estate billionaire who'd built half the city skyline. Evelyn was his 3rd wife, young enough to be his great-granddaughter. The math wasn't complicated. Neither was the motivation. Jade Maron owned this hotel, which meant Evelyn owned it too, which meant Ella was at her mercy every single day. "You know," Evelyn said, circling Ella slowly like a predator studying prey. "I've been thinking about you." Ella's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from Evelyn thinking about her. "Have you?" Ella managed to keep her voice neutral. "Mom." Evelyn tilted her head, studying Ella with those cold blue eyes. "You work so hard. You're here every day, so dedicated. It's almost admirable, in a simple, uncomplicated way." Her friends laughed on cue, and Ella felt a familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. But she kept her face carefully blank, refusing to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her pain. The heels clicked closer, closer, and then Evelyn reached into her designer purse, pulling out something that would change everything. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible at work? How did you handle it? The moment when the hunter realizes she's been hunting a lioness. Evelyn's hand gripped the window ledge so hard her knuckles turned white against the diamonds on her fingers. 2 stories below, on the red carpet, the woman in gold was speaking to the head photographer. Even from this distance, even through glass, Evelyn could see the ease in her posture, the confidence in her gestures, the way she commanded space without demanding it. Is that... Madison started, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. It can't be, Sloane breathed, pressing closer to the window. That's the janitor? Harper's voice came out strangled, disbelieving. Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her perfect plan, her carefully orchestrated humiliation, was unraveling before her eyes. That was supposed to be her janitor, her cleaning lady, the woman who pushed a cart and mopped floors and knew her place. That woman was supposed to show up in something pathetic from Walmart or Goodwill, was supposed to look out of place and desperate, was supposed to be the joke that cemented Evelyn's power. But the woman on the red carpet looked like she belonged there more than Evelyn did. The color drained from Evelyn's face. The diamonds at her throat suddenly felt like they were choking her. Her hands began to shake, making her bracelets jingle, a sound that now seemed less like music and more like alarm bells. That's impossible, she whispered. That dress, that hair, she's just a what? Madison asked, still staring down at the spectacle below. Evelyn, who is she really? She cleans toilets at the hotel. Evelyn's voice cracked, desperation seeping through her carefully maintained composure. She's nobody. But even as she said it, she could see it wasn't true. Whatever that woman had been when Evelyn handed her that invitation, she wasn't nobody now. Below, the woman finished with the photographers and began walking toward the entrance. The crowd that had gathered, other guests, valets, even security guards, parted for her like water around a ship's prow, not because she demanded it, but because her presence commanded it. Evelyn stepped back from the window, her mind racing. She needed to regain control, needed to salvage this, needed to remind everyone, especially that woman who held the power here. I need to go down there, she announced, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. I need to greet her, to welcome her. Are you sure that's a good idea? Sloane asked carefully. Of course I'm sure. Evelyn snapped, her composure cracking further. This is my party, my home. She's here because I invited her. I decide how this goes. She turned to her friends, and they could see the calculation in her eyes, the desperate scramble to turn disaster into victory. Come with me, she commanded. All of you. I want her to see that we're united, that we know what she is, even if she's wearing a nice dress. The 4 women moved toward the ballroom doors, Evelyn in the lead, her white gown trailing behind her like a battle standard. But her hands were still shaking. Her breathing was still shallow, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who just realized the trap they'd set had caught the wrong animal. Jade Maron, forgotten in his chair, watched his wife rush past with mild curiosity before returning to his thoughts. Whatever was happening, it seemed more interesting than anything else tonight had been. By the time Evelyn reached the grand foyer, Ella had just entered. The massive space seemed to shrink around her, not because she was taking up physical space, but because her presence was so commanding that everything else became background. The oil paintings on the walls, the silk wallpaper, the chandelier dripping crystal, all of it faded into irrelevance. Ella stood at the base of the entrance stairs, and around her, the foyer had gone quiet. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses hung forgotten in hands. Everyone was watching, waiting. Evelyn descended the grand staircase from the 2nd floor, her 3 friends flanking her like an honor guard. She'd forced her face back into that practiced smile, had steadied her hands, had wrapped herself in the armor of her wealth and position. But inside, her heart was hammering, her stomach was churning, because that woman, that janitor, was supposed to be the punchline, and instead she looked like the author of a very different story. The crowd parted as Evelyn approached, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood in water. People whispered behind hands, their eyes darting between Evelyn in her white Verawang and Ella in her gold Simone Laurent. Evelyn stopped 3 feet away from Ella, close enough to engage, far enough to maintain the fiction of control. "Well," she said, her voice pitched loud enough for the growing crowd to hear, dripping with that false sweetness she perfected over years of social warfare. "What a surprise seeing you here." Ella turned slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world, like Evelyn wasn't worth rushing for. When their eyes met, Evelyn felt something cold slide down her spine. Those weren't the eyes of the woman who cleaned her floors. Those weren't the eyes of someone who could be made small by cruelty or crushed by humiliation. Those were the eyes of someone who knew exactly what game was being played, and knew she'd already won. "Evelyn," Ella said simply. Her voice was calm, clear, carrying easily through the silent foyer without being raised. "Thank you for the invitation." "Of course." Evelyn pushed through her smile, though it felt like her face might crack. "I'm so glad you could make it. You really—" She let her eyes travel over Ella's dress, her hair, her jewelry, try to find something to criticize, some flaw to exploit. "You really dressed up." The words came out slightly strangled, because there was nothing to criticize. The dress was perfect. The hair was stunning. The jewelry was elegant. Everything about Ella's presentation was flawless. Ella's lips curved into a small smile. Not wide, not obvious. Just a slight upturn at the corners that somehow contained entire worlds of meaning. "Yeah," she said softly. "I did." The pause that followed felt like forever. Evelyn opened her mouth to say something cutting, something clever, something that would put this woman back in her place. But Ella spoke first. "And looking at you, I'd say you dress up too." Another pause. Shorter this time. Sharper. Ella's smile didn't change, but her eyes did. They glinted with something that might have been pity, might have been amusement, might have been victory. "Shame," she said, her voice still soft, still calm, still carrying through the silent room. "All this money can't buy class." The gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. Someone's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the shocked silence. Evelyn's face went from pale to bright red in an instant. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Behind her, Madison's eyes were wide with shock. Sloane had her hand pressed to her mouth. Harper looked like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or run. Evelyn finally managed, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "How dare you? Who do you think you're just a—" The words tumbled out, desperate and disjointed, the careful facade crumbling in real time. Around them, phones came out. People weren't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. This was the kind of moment that would be talked about for months, years, maybe. Evelyn Maron, queen of society, being put in her place by the woman she'd invited as a joke. "Oh, it gets better. Keep watching." "Hey, what?" Ella asked, her voice still calm, still controlled. "A janitor? Is that what you're going to say?" Evelyn's mouth snapped shut. Her hands clenched at her sides, making her bracelets jingle frantically. "Because yes," Ella continued, taking a single step forward. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. "I do clean floors at the Maron Luxury Hotel. I push a cart and mop hallways and scrub toilets. That's what I do to survive." The crowd leaned in, riveted. "But that's not who I am," Ella said quietly. "And the fact that you can't tell the difference says more about you than it does about me." Evelyn's face twisted with rage. "Who do you think you? What's going on here?" The voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. Everyone turned. Jade Maron stood at the base of the second-floor staircase, leaning on his ebony cane, his 90-year-old eyes suddenly sharp and focused in a way they hadn't been all evening. "Jade," Evelyn said quickly, her voice pitching higher. "It's nothing. Just greeting a guest." "That doesn't look like nothing," Jade interrupted, moving closer with surprising speed for his age. His eyes were fixed on Ella, his expression curious, engaged in a way Evelyn hadn't seen in months. "That looks like something." He approached Ella, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to remember something important. "Have we met before?" he asked. "No, sir," Ella said respectfully. We haven't. But there's something familiar about you, Jade persisted, his brow furrowing. Your face. Your bearing. I know I've seen. Oh my God. The voice came from the crowd. An older woman, maybe 60, pushed through the gathered guests. She was elegant in a navy dress, her gray hair styled simply, her jewelry understated. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Is that, she breathed. My God, is that Miriam Mark's granddaughter? The foyer went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Evelyn's face went from red to white in an instant. Her friends looked at each other in confusion. But the older woman kept coming, tears streaming down her face, her hands reaching for Ella. You're Ella, aren't you? She said, her voice thick with emotion. Ella Mark, I would recognize you anywhere. You look just like your grandmother. Ella's composure wavered for the first time that evening. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Yes, she said softly. I'm Ella. My God, the woman said again, taking Ella's hands in hers. My God, where have you been? We've all been looking for you. After the foundation closed, after everything fell apart, we tried to find you, but you just disappeared. The crowd was murmuring now. Phones out, people leaning close to their neighbors to whisper frantically. Miriam Mark? The civil rights lawyer? Didn't she have a foundation? I thought that closed years ago. Is this her granddaughter? The older woman turned to crowd, still holding Ella's hands, tears still streaming down her face. This is Ella Mark, she announced, her voice carrying across the foyer. Dr. Miriam Mark's granddaughter. Miriam was one of the greatest civil rights lawyers this city has ever known. She fought for justice when no one else would. She built a foundation that helped thousands of people. She turned back to Ella, her voice breaking. I was one of the first lawyers your grandmother helped. I was fresh out of law school, drowning in debt, working 3 jobs, and she took me under her wing, mentored me, gave me my first real case, taught me what it meant to use the law to help people, not just to make money. She squeezed Ella's hands tighter. She saved my career. She changed my life. And when I heard she'd passed, her voice broke completely. When I heard the foundation close, that you'd disappeared, I tried to find you. So many of us tried. We wanted to help. We wanted to honor her memory. We wanted to make sure you were okay. The crowd was transfixed. Some people were crying openly now. Others had their hands pressed to their mouths. The energy in the room had completely transformed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This wasn't a spectacle. This was something real. Jade Maron moved closer, his expression softening with recognition and something that might have been shame. I knew Miriam Mark, he said quietly. I donated to her foundation, attended her fundraisers. He looked at Ella with new eyes. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, a force of nature. He turned to Evelyn and his voice became cold. Evelyn, what exactly is this? Evelyn opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hands were shaking violently now. Her face had gone from white to a sickly gray. She works at the hotel, Evelyn stammered. She's housekeeping. I just thought. You thought what? Jade's voice was quiet, dangerous. That you'd invite her here to humiliate her, to make a spectacle of her. It was just supposed to be funny, Evelyn whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Just a joke. A joke, Jade repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. You tried to humiliate the granddaughter of one of the city's greatest civil rights leaders. A woman whose grandmother did more good in 1 year than most people do in their entire lives. He turned back to Ella, and his voice softened again. I apologize, he said simply, on behalf of my wife and myself. This is unconscionable. Around them, the crowd murmured agreement. Some people were nodding. Others were looking at Evelyn with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. The hunter had become the hunted. The trap had sprung on the wrong person. And Evelyn Maron, in her custom Vera Wang gown and her $250,000 diamonds, looked smaller than she ever had in her life. If you've ever wanted to see karma in action, share this with someone who needs to see it. The older woman, who would later introduce herself as Judge Patricia Holloway, currently sitting on the state Supreme Court, still held Ella's hands, studying her face like she was memorizing it. "I was one of the first lawyers your grandmother helped," she said again, her voice steadier now but still thick with emotion. "She saved my career. She taught me everything I know about using the law to help people, not hurt them." She looked around at the gathered crowd, many of whom were now openly staring at Ella with new understanding, new respect. "We've all wondered what happened to you," Judge Holloway continued, "after the foundation closed, after you disappeared. Some of us tried to find you, but—" She shook her head. "We should have tried harder." Ella's throat was tight. Her eyes were burning, but she kept her voice steady. "I survived," she said simply. "That's all." "You did more than survive," the judge said firmly. "You're here. You're standing. Your grandmother would be so proud." And that's when Evelyn's breathing became rapid and shallow, when the reality of what she'd done, what she tried to do, crashed down on her like a wave. She'd tried to humiliate a legend's granddaughter in front of witnesses, in front of judges and lawyers and people who actually mattered. And the worst part? She'd succeeded only in humiliating herself. Sometimes the truth doesn't whisper. It roars. Judge Patricia Holloway still held Ella's hands, tears streaming freely down her face, and her words had opened a floodgate. "Your grandmother," the judge continued, her voice strengthening with conviction, "didn't just practice law. She changed lives. She changed the entire legal landscape of the city. When I graduated from law school, I had 6 figures of debt, no connections, and 3 job offers that would have destroyed my soul. Corporate firms that wanted me to defend pharmaceutical companies and real estate developers. The exact people who were harming communities like the one I came from." She looked around at the crowd, making eye contact with people who were leaning in, riveted. "Dr. Miriam Mark found me at a career fair. She took one look at my resume, one look at my face, and said, 'You don't want to be there. You want to be here.' She hired me as an intern at the Mark Foundation, paid me more than the corporate firms offered, taught me what it meant to use the law as a tool for justice, not oppression." Her voice broke again. "She saved me from becoming the kind of lawyer I would have hated. And she did it for hundreds of us. Thousands." A voice called from the crowd. An older black man in an expensive tuxedo pushed forward. His name was Dr. Marcus Williams, and he was now the president of the city's largest hospital. But 30 years ago, he'd been something very different. "Dr. Mark represented me pro bono when I was wrongfully accused," he said, his deep voice carrying across the foyer. "I was a medical student, accused of a crime I didn't commit. The evidence was fabricated. The system was rigged. I was going to lose everything, my education, my future, my life." He looked at Ella with eyes that shone with gratitude and remembered fear. "Your grandmother worked on my case for 2 years, for free, while working 10 other cases. She exposed the corruption, got the charges dropped, and then helped me sue for damages. The settlement paid for the rest of my medical school." He gestured to himself, his tuxedo, the expensive watch on his wrist. "I'm only here, I'm only anywhere, because of Miriam Mark, because she believed that justice wasn't just for people who could afford it." More voices joined in. The crowd shifted, people moving forward, eager to share their own stories, their own connections to the Mark legacy. "She helped my parents keep their home when the bank tried to foreclose illegally," a young woman in a silver gown called out. "I was 8 years old. I remember her coming to our house, explaining our rights, fighting for us. We still live in that house. She got my brother out of prison," another man added, "wrongful conviction. 15 years stolen from his life. Dr. Mark took his case on appeal, worked it for 3 years, and got him exonerated. He's here tonight. He's the chef who prepared your dinner." The stories kept coming, each one building on the last, creating a chorus of testimony that filled the grand foyer and spilled up the staircase toward the ballroom above. "The Mark Foundation helped me start my business. She taught me that the law could be a force for good. She was the first person who ever believed in me. We've been looking for you for years. When the foundation closed, we tried to find you. We wanted to help, to give back." Ella stood in the center of it all, tears streaming down her face now, no longer trying to hide them. These were her grandmother's people. These were the lives Miriam Mark had touched, had changed, had saved. And they'd been looking for her. All this time she'd been invisible, hiding in shame, convinced she was nobody. They'd been looking for her. Around the foyer, phones were held high, recording everything. This wasn't just society gossip anymore. This was history being made in real time, the redemption of a legacy, the resurrection of a name that should never have been forgotten. And in the middle of all of it, Evelyn Maron stood frozen, her white Vera Wang gown suddenly looking less like a symbol of triumph and more like a target, her diamonds catching the light like warning signals, her face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Shock, horror, understanding, denial, rage, fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. The janitor was supposed to be humiliated. Instead, Evelyn was watching her own social execution in real time. Jade Maron had been half present for most of his vow renewal, his mind wandering to business deals and board meetings and all the things that mattered more to him than parties and social performances. But he was fully present now. His 90-year-old eyes were sharp and clear, fixed on Ella with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire by reading people, by understanding value, by recognizing quality when he saw it. "I remember now," he said, his thin voice cutting to the testimonials. The crowd quieted, turning to face him. Dr. Miriam Mark. I donated to her foundation for years. Attended her fundraisers. She was... He searched for the right word. Formidable. Brilliant. Uncompromising. He moved closer to Ella, his cane tapping against the marble floor with authority. "I remember you too," he said, studying her face. "You were young. 20, 21 maybe. You gave a speech at one of the galas about criminal justice reform. You spoke for 15 minutes without notes, quoted Supreme Court cases from memory, and made half the lawyers in the room look like amateurs." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I told your grandmother that night that you were going to change the world. She looked at me and said, 'She already has. You just haven't noticed yet.'" His smile faded. He turned slowly, his gaze moving to his wife. Evelyn. The single word carried the weight of decades of power, of decisions that moved millions of dollars, of a man who was used to being obeyed without question. Evelyn flinched like she'd been struck. "Jade, I can explain. What exactly is this?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded consequences. "What have you done?" "It was just..." Evelyn's voice was high, desperate. Her carefully crafted composure shattered beyond repair. "She works at the hotel. She's housekeeping. I thought it would be funny to..." "Funny," Jade repeated, the word dropping like a stone into still water. "You thought it would be funny to invite the granddaughter of one of the city's most respected civil rights leaders to our vow renewal for the purpose of humiliating her in front of society? I didn't know who she was." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I didn't know about her grandmother, about the foundation. I just saw a janitor and I thought..." "You didn't think," Jade interrupted, his disappointment colder than any anger. "That's the problem. You saw a woman who cleans floors and assumed that's all she was. You saw someone you perceived as beneath you and decided that gave you the right to be cruel." He looked around to gather crowd, lawyers, doctors, business leaders, philanthropists, people who'd spent their lives building things that mattered. "When I built my first business," Jade said, his voice carrying across the silent foyer, "I was a janitor. Did you know that, Evelyn?" Evelyn's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. 1955. I was 17 years old, fresh off the boat from Poland. Didn't speak a word of English. I got a job cleaning offices in a textile factory. Night shift, minimum wage. His eyes grew distant with memory. The executives would walk past me like I was part of the furniture, like I was nothing. He refocused on Evelyn, and his gaze was ice. But one man, the owner's son, he saw me reading a book during my break, asked me what I was reading, found out I was teaching myself English and accounting from library books. He started teaching me about business, gave me my first real opportunity. Jade's voice hardened. That man understood something you clearly don't. A person's job doesn't define their worth. Their character does. Their resilience does. Their dignity does. He turned back to Ella, and his expression softened again. Miss Mark, I apologize, on behalf of myself and my wife. Though clearly, I should have been paying better attention to the kind of person I married. The last words were delivered with a coldness that made even the sophisticated crowd wince. This wasn't just disappointment. This was a 90-year-old billionaire publicly questioning his marriage to his 26-year-old trophy wife. Evelyn made a strangled sound, her hand flying to her throat, her face crumbling. But Jade wasn't finished. Your grandmother's foundation, he said to Ella, closed because of lack of funding, didn't it? After she passed? Ella nodded, not trusting her voice. That was a loss to this entire city. Jade said, the work she did, the work you both did, mattered more than most of what happens in these buildings. He paused, his businessman's mind already calculating. We should talk, he said simply, after this disaster of an evening is over, about the foundation, about bringing back what should never have been lost. The crowd murmured with approval. Some people started nodding. Others were already pulling out phones, texting, making plans. This was how things got done in their world, not through formal channels or applications, but through moments like this, through recognition, through respect, through people with power deciding to use it for something good. And Ella, standing in her gold dress with tears on her cheeks and her grandmother's legacy restored, finally understood something her 3 years of invisibility had taught her. You can lose everything. Your job, your home, your identity, your place in the world. But you can never lose who you are, not unless you let them take it. The foyer had become a living thing, breathing, watching, waiting. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. The testimonials had quieted. The phones were still recording. The crowd pressed closer, forming a circle around Ella like she was about to deliver a verdict. And, in a way, she was. Ella took a slow breath, felt the gold dress move around her, felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy and her own survival, and 3 years of being invisible all compressed into this single moment. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I didn't come here for revenge, she said, and the crowd leaned in, straining to catch every word. I didn't come here to ruin anyone's special day. I didn't even come here to prove anything to you. Her eyes swept across the gathered faces, the lawyers, the doctors, the business leaders, the people who'd known her grandmother, the people who'd never seen her before tonight, the people who'd walked past her in the hotel without seeing her face. I came because I was invited, and I came to remind myself of something I'd forgotten. She paused, and in that pause, you could have heard a heartbeat. For 3 years, I've been invisible, not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. I lost everything when my grandmother died. The foundation collapsed. I had no degree, no money, no safety net. So I survived the only way I knew how, by making myself small, by staying quiet, by accepting that maybe the world was right about me. Maybe I was nobody. Judge Holloway made a small, pained sound. Others in the crowd were crying openly now. But tonight, Ella continued, her voice growing stronger, I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. Dignity is not given. It is carried. She looked directly at Evelyn, who was still frozen in place, her face blotchy with tears and rage and shame. You invited me here to humiliate me, Ella said simply, to remind me and everyone else that I was just a janitor, just a help, just someone who didn't belong in your world. Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly her bracelets sounded like wind chimes of a storm. But here's what you forgot, Ella said, her voice soft but cutting like a surgical blade. Dignity isn't about money. It isn't about position. It isn't about whether you wear designer gowns or clean toilets or push a mop through marble hallways. She turned back to the crowd, addressing all of them now. Dignity is about who you are when nobody's watching. It's about how you treat people when you don't think they matter. It's about whether you use your power to lift people up or push them down. Her voice rose slightly, carrying to every corner of the foyer, up the staircase, into the ballroom beyond. The people you ignore, the ones you walk past without seeing, the ones you treat like furniture, the ones you assume have no story worth hearing. We're carrying things you can't imagine. We're surviving things that would break you. We're holding on to our dignity with both hands while you try to strip it away for entertainment. Silence. Complete, total silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Judge Holloway joined in, then Dr. Williams, then the young woman whose parents kept their home, then the man whose brother was freed from prison. The applause spread like fire through dry grass. Within seconds, the entire foyer was thundering with it. People stood up from where they'd been sitting on the stairs. Champagne glasses were set down on tables, so hands could be free to clap. And it wasn't polite applause. It wasn't society applause. It was real. Some people were crying as they clapped. Others were laughing with joy. A few were doing both at once, their faces wet with tears, their hands coming together again and again. Ella stood in the center of it, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt seen, truly seen, not as a janitor, not as a failure, not as someone to be pitted or dismissed or humiliated, but as herself, as Ella Mark, as Miriam Mark's granddaughter, as a woman who had survived hell and still carried her dignity like a crown. The standing ovation went on for a full minute. Then, too, people who hadn't even known Dr. Miriam Mark were clapping because they'd just witnessed something powerful, something true, something that reminded them why dignity mattered, why cruelty had consequences, why the measure of a person had nothing to do with their job title. And in the middle of all that applause, all that recognition, all that respect, Evelyn broke. If this gave you chills, drop a comment below. This is what dignity looks like. Her face crumbled like a building losing its foundation. Her carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. Her hands flew to her face, try to hide what everyone could already see, the complete and total collapse of her composure. She'd planned this moment for days. The perfect humiliation, the perfect joke, the perfect reminder of who had power and who didn't. And instead, she humiliated herself, exposed herself, revealed to everyone exactly what kind of person she was beneath the designer gown and the diamonds and the billionaire husband. Cruel, small, insecure, petty, a woman who needed to make others feel worthless to feel worthy herself. The bouquet she'd been clutching, white roses and orchids that cost more than most people's monthly rent, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, flowers scattering, petals bruising, the perfect arrangement falling apart, just like her perfect plan, just like her perfect image, just like everything. "I can't," she gasped, her voice high and broken. "I can't do this." And she ran, not walked, not glided with composure, ran. Her expensive heels clicked frantically against the marble as she gathered her white gown in both hands and fled toward the side exit. Her friends, Madison, Sloane, Harper, called after her, their voices uncertain, but she didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran like the building was on fire, because, in a way, it was her entire social standing was burning down around her, and everyone was watching it happen in real time, recording it, sharing it, making it permanent. The massive doors slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the foyer like a judge's gavel. And then there was silence again. But this time it was different. Not the silence of shock or anticipation. The silence of completion, of justice, of the universe correcting itself. Judge Holloway still stood beside Ella, her hand now resting gently on Ella's shoulder. Dr. Williams had moved closer, along with a dozen others who'd been touched by Miriam Mark's work. They formed a protective circle around her, these people who understood what she'd survived, what she'd carried, what she'd just done. And in front of them all stood Jade Maron, 90 years old, leaning on his ebony cane, looking at Ella with something that might have been admiration, might have been respect, might have been a recognition of one survivor seeing another. He opened his mouth to speak. Hit that like button if you believe respect should be universal. True victory isn't about making others fall. It's about rising so high they have to look up. The side doors where Evelyn had fled were still swinging slightly, the distant sound of her heels echoing down some marble corridor. But no one was looking at the doors anymore. No one was following her. No one cared. All eyes were on Ella. Jade Maron took a step closer, his cane tapping softly against the floor. At 90 years old, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to conserve energy, but his eyes were sharp, engaged in a way they hadn't been in months, maybe years. "Miss Mark," he said, and his voice carried a weight that silenced even the lingering whispers. "I owe you an apology." Ella opened her mouth to respond, but Jade held up one weathered hand. "Not just for tonight. Not just for what my wife attempted to do." He paused, and for a moment, the billionaire looked almost vulnerable. "I owe you an apology for not paying attention, for not asking questions, for being so disconnected from my own businesses that I didn't know one of Dr. Miriam Mark's protégés was working as housekeeping in my hotel." Judge Holloway squeezed Ella's shoulder gently, encouragingly. "Your grandmother," Jade continued, his voice roughening with emotion, "was one of the finest people I ever met. She never asked me for anything, not for herself anyway, only for others, only for the people who needed help. And when I gave to her foundation, she made sure every dollar went where it was supposed to go. No fancy galas, no administrative bloat, just results, just lives changed." He shifted his weight on his cane, and suddenly he looked less like a billionaire and more like what he'd once been, an immigrant teenager who cleaned floors and dreamed of something better. "The Mark Legal Aid Foundation shouldn't have closed," he said firmly. "That was a loss the city couldn't afford. Your grandmother built something that mattered more than most of what gets built in this city, including my buildings." Jade looked around at the gathered crowd, at the lawyers and doctors and business leaders who'd been touched by Miriam's work. "So here's what I'm proposing," he said, his businessman's voice returning, strong and clear. "I want to help you rebuild the Mark Foundation. Seed money to start. A proper endowment, so it never has to close again. Office space in one of my buildings, rent-free, permanently. Whatever you need to restore what should never have been lost." The crowd erupted in murmurs of approval. Several people nodded vigorously. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. Tears, real tears, not the controlled emotion she'd been managing all evening, spilled down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Judge Holloway said softly beside her. "Your grandmother would want this. The city needs this." "I'll contribute," Dr. Marcus Williams called out from the crowd. "Whatever you need for medical legal cases, I'm in. Our law firm will provide pro bono hours." Another voice added, "I can help with fundraising." Someone else offered, "My foundation will partner. We have office furniture and storage. I know grant writers." The offers came fast, overlapping, genuine. These weren't society promises that would be forgotten by morning. These were people who'd been looking for a way to give back to Miriam's legacy, who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd tried to find Ella for years. Business cards appeared. Phone numbers were exchanged. Plans were made in real time, the kind of collaboration that only happened when the right people were in the same room at the same time with a shared purpose. Jade pulled a card from his jacket pocket. Simple, cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering that just said Jade Maron and a phone number. "Call me Monday," he said, pressing into Ella's hand. "We'll draw up the papers. Get everything legal. Get it started right." He paused and his voice softened. "Your grandmother gave me my first business loan. Did you know that? 1962. I've been saving for years, working every job I could find, learning everything I could learn. I wanted to buy a small apartment building, fix it up, rent it out. But no bank would touch me. Immigrant accent, no credit history." Jade's eyes grew distant with memory. Miriam heard about it somehow, probably through one of her clients. She showed up at the factory where I was working night shift, told me she had a client who'd been given a settlement and wanted to invest it. Would I be interested in a loan at fair terms? He smiled faintly. I found out years later that there was no client. It was her own money. She saw potential in a janitor with dreams, and she decided to invest in him. That apartment building, it was the start of everything I built. Jade's voice grew thick. I never got to pay her back properly. Never got to tell her what that loan meant, how it changed my entire life. He looked Ella straight in the eye. "So, let me pay it forward. Let me help you rebuild what she built. Let me make sure her legacy, your legacy, continues. Ella couldn't speak, could barely breathe. All she could do was nod, tears streaming freely now. Her heart, so full it felt like it might burst. Thank you, she finally managed, her voice breaking on both words. This means everything. No, Jade said gently. Thank you for surviving, for coming here tonight, for reminding all of us what really matters. He gestured to the crowd, to the phones that were still recording, to the moment that was now permanently captured and would be shared thousands of times before morning. You gave us a gift tonight, he said, the gift of remembering, of seeing clearly, of understanding that worth has nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. Around them, people were crying openly, not caring about their makeup or their images. Even some of the men, powerful executives and lawyers and doctors, had tears in their eyes because they had just witnessed something rare, something true, something that reminded them why they'd chosen their professions in the first place, before the money and the power and the society parties had complicated everything. They'd witnessed dignity defeating cruelty. They'd witnessed legacy defeating shame. They'd witnessed a queen reclaiming her crown. An hour later, Ella stood at the entrance to the Grand Bellwood estate, preparing to leave. But this time, everything was different. The crowd didn't part because they were uncomfortable or embarrassed. They parted with respect, with honor, creating a path for her like courtiers making way for royalty. As she walked toward the exit, people stopped her, not to gawk or judge, but to speak, to connect, to share. Your grandmother helped my sister through her divorce, a woman in an emerald gown said, taking Ella's hand. She probably doesn't remember. It was such a small case compared to some of her big ones, but it saved my sister's life. Literally saved it. I was one of her law students, a younger man added. She taught a clinic at the university one semester, changed the entire direction of my career. I'm a public defender now because of her. My father still talks about her, an elderly man said, his voice shaking with emotion. She defended him in 1973, police brutality case. She won when everyone said it was impossible. The stories kept coming, each one a thread in the tapestry of Miriam Mark's legacy, each one a reminder that the work she'd done had rippled outward in ways she'd never fully known. And standing along the walls, watching with wide eyes and tear-stained faces, were the staff, the waiters holding champagne trays, the valets by the doors, the security guards at their posts. They'd watched the whole thing unfold, watched one of their own, someone who cleaned floors and pushed carts and lived in the invisible margins, walk into the lion's den and emerge victorious. As Ella passed, a young black woman in a server's uniform caught her eye. She couldn't have been more than 19, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her hands clasped nervously in front of her white apron. Ella stopped. The entire procession stopped with her. She walked over to the young woman, whose eyes grew wider with each step. What's your name? Ella asked gently. Katisha, the girl stammered. Tasha Williams. Tasha, Ella repeated, making sure to remember it. How long have you worked here? 6 months, ma'am. I'm saving for college. Community college, she added quickly, like she needed to explain, to justify. Ella smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. That's wonderful, she said. What do you want to study? Nursing, Tasha whispered. I want to be a nurse. Help people. Ella reached out and took the girl's hands in hers. Tasha's eyes filled with tears. Listen to me carefully, Ella said, her voice soft but intense. Never let anyone make you feel small because of the work you do to survive. You're not just a server. You're a student. You're a future nurse. You're someone with dreams and purpose and worth. She squeezed Tasha's hands. Never forget your worth, Ella said. No matter how invisible they try to make you, no matter how much they walk past you like your furniture, you matter. Your dreams matter. Your story matters. Tasha nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, her lips trembling. Thank you, she managed. Thank you so much. Ella pulled her into a brief hug, and around them, the watching staff, the people who understood what it meant to be invisible, wiped their own tears, stood a little straighter, held their heads a little higher, because they just learned something powerful. Invisibility is something others impose. It's not something you have to accept. Ella released Tasha and continued toward the exit, her gold dress flowing behind her like a cape, like a flag, like a declaration. The massive doors opened before her, and there, parked at the entrance with the engine running, was the black Mercedes. Maron Luxury stood beside it, leaning against the passenger door, her arms crossed, a proud smile playing at her lips. "Ready to go?" she called. Ella laughed, a real laugh, free and genuine and full of joy. More than ready. The Mercedes pulled away from the grand Bellwood estate as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange that matched Ella's dress almost perfectly. In the back seat, Ella watched the mansion recede to the tinted windows, the white stone glowing in the evening light, the chandeliers visible through the windows, the people still clustered in the entrance, still talking, still processing what they'd witnessed. She could see phone screens glowing in the twilight, people sharing, posting, making permanent what had happened tonight. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The video would be everywhere. The story would spread. But that didn't matter anymore, because it wasn't about them. It had never been about them. "So," Simone said from the front seat, turning slightly to look at Ella, "was it worth it?" Ella met her eyes in the rear-view mirror. Simone's expression was knowing, proud, waiting. "It wasn't about proving anything to them," Ella said slowly, her voice thoughtful. "It was never about showing Evelyn or her friends or society that I was worthy of respect." She paused, looking at her reflection in the window, the gold dress, the crown of curls, the face that looked like her grandmother's. "It was about proving something to myself," she continued, "that I hadn't lost who I was, that 3 years of being invisible hadn't erased me, that I could still stand in rooms full of powerful people and remember my own power." Simone nodded slowly. "And did you remember?" Ella smiled, a smile that reached her eyes, that came from somewhere deep and true and unshakable. "Yeah," she said softly. "I remembered." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city transforming outside the windows, from the wealthy neighborhood to the commercial district to the working-class areas where life was harder but somehow more honest. "Jade's offer," Simone finally said. "You're going to take it?" "I'm going to take it," Ella confirmed. "The Mark Foundation is coming back. Your grandmother would be so proud. I think," Ella's voice caught, "I think she'd be proud that I survived, that I kept going even when everything fell apart, that I didn't let them make me believe I was nothing." "You were never nothing," Simone said fiercely. "Not for one single second of those 3 years. You were always Ella Mark. You were always Miriam's granddaughter. You were always powerful. You just forgot for a little while." "I won't forget again," Ella promised. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in deeper golds, and Ella watched her city pass by. The city her grandmother had fought for, the city where she'd lost everything, the city where she just wanted all back. Not the money, not the position, not the recognition, but herself. "Thank you," Ella said quietly, not sure she was talking to Simone or to her grandmother or to the universe or to herself. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," Simone said. "Not for 1 second did I give up on you." The Mercedes turned onto Ella Street, the broken pavement, the crumbling buildings, the neighborhood that would probably be her home for a while longer while she got back on her feet. But it didn't look the same anymore. It looked like the place where she'd survived, where she'd held onto her dignity with both hands, where she kept her grandmother's wooden box and her photographs and her memory alive even when the world tried to make her forget. It looked like the place where Ella Mark had been reborn. The car pulled to a stop in front of her building. "You gonna be okay?" Simone asked. "I'm gonna be better than okay," Ella said. "I'm gonna be extraordinary." She got out of the car, the gold dress catching the last rays of sunlight, making her glow like she was made of the same stuff as stars. As she walked toward her building, she looked up at the sky, at the gold and pink and orange painted across it like a promise, like a blessing, like a crown. And she whispered, so softly that only she and the universe could hear, Thank you, grandmother. I'm home. Not home in the building. Home in herself. Home in her dignity. Home in the knowledge that she was, and always had been, exactly enough. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't defined by your circumstances, let us know in the comments. Ella Mark walked into that party expecting to be humiliated. She walked out having reclaimed her legacy, restored her grandmother's foundation, and reminded an entire room full of powerful people what real power looks like. Real power isn't about making others feel small. It's about standing tall even when the world tries to break you. It's about carrying your dignity like a crown even when you're pushing a mop. It's about knowing that your job title doesn't define your worth. Your character does. Hit subscribe because we're bringing you more stories of dignity, resilience, and people who refuse to stay invisible. We all have an Ella Mark inside us. That person who knows their worth even when the world doesn't see it. That person who survives impossible things and still stands tall. That person who remembers that dignity isn't given, it's carried. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they're royalty, no matter what job title they carry. Maybe they're working 3 jobs to support their family. Maybe they're cleaning offices while studying for their degree. Maybe they're doing work that others look down on while carrying dreams that would humble kings. They need to hear this. You are not your circumstances. You are not your struggles. You are not what others say you are. You are who you choose to be. And if you choose dignity, if you choose self-respect, if you choose to remember your worth, no one can take that from you. Not with cruelty, not with mockery, not with anything. What would you have done in Ella's situation? Tell us below. We read every comment. 6 months later, the Mark Legal Aid Foundation reopened on a Tuesday morning in June. The office was in the Maron Tower, 12th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Rent-free, forever, per the agreement Jade Maron had drawn up and signed personally. The walls were painted the same purple that Dr. Miriam Mark had loved, her signature color, her power color. On the main wall hung a portrait of Miriam in her prime. Fierce eyes, confident smile, purple suit, looking like she could take on the world single-handed. Because she had. And now her granddaughter was going to continue what she'd started. Ella Mark stood at the podium in the conference room, no longer in a cleaning uniform, but in a tailored navy suit that Simone had insisted on making for her. Her natural hair was styled in those same crown-like curls, and around her neck hung a simple necklace, her grandmother's passed down, finally worn again. In the audience sat 100 people. Some were there for legal help. People who couldn't afford lawyers, who were drowning in systems designed to crush them, who needed someone to fight for them the way Miriam once had. Others were there to support. Judge Patricia Holloway, now on the foundation's board. Dr. Marcus Williams, who donated the money for their medical legal division. Jade Maron, looking healthier and more engaged than he had in years. Some said divorcing Evelyn had given him a new lease on life. And Maron Luxury, sitting in the front row, wearing purple in honor of Miriam, her eyes bright with pride. Behind the audience, standing along the back wall, because they couldn't take time off work but wanted to be there anyway, were a dozen people in service uniforms. Hotel workers, restaurant staff, janitors, security guards, people who understood what it meant to be invisible, people who'd heard about Ella's story, people who needed to see that one of their own could rise. Among them stood Tasha Williams, the young server from the Grand Bellwood estate. Her eyes glowed with hope as she watched Ella Mark prepare to speak. Ella looked at the portrait of her grandmother, at the purple walls, at the people gathered who needed help, and she smiled. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Ella Mark, and I'm honored to welcome you to the reopening of the Mark Legal Aid Foundation. This foundation was built by my grandmother, Dr. Miriam Mark, on one simple principle. Justice is not a privilege of those who can afford it. Justice is a right for everyone." The crowd murmured agreement. For 3 years, this foundation was closed. For 3 years, the work my grandmother dedicated her life to was paused. Ella's voice grew stronger. But today, we're opening those doors again. Today, we're continuing what she started. Today, we're reminding the city that everyone deserves a voice. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Some of you are here because you need legal help. You're facing eviction or discrimination or wrongful charges, or any 100 ways the system can fail you. We're here to fight for you. She gestured to the lawyers seated at tables along the side. 10 of them, all volunteers, all ready to work. Others are here to support this work, to donate, to volunteer, to spread the word. Thank you. We couldn't do this without you. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. And some of you are here because you heard my story, because you're doing work that others don't value, work that makes you feel invisible, work that pays the bills but doesn't feed your soul. Her eyes found Tasha in the back, found the other service workers standing tall in their uniforms. I see you, Ella said, and I want you to know your work has dignity. Your dreams have worth. Your story matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. She placed her hand on the podium, steadying herself for the final words. My grandmother used to say that dignity is not given. It is carried. And she was right. But I'd like to add something to that. Dignity is also shared. When we lift each other up, when we see each other's humanity, when we fight for each other's rights, we multiply dignity. We create more of it. We make the world a place where everyone can stand tall. She looked up at her grandmother's portrait one more time. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to fight for justice. We're going to defend dignity. We're going to make sure that no one in this city has to face the system alone. Ella's smile widened. The Mark Foundation is back, and we're just getting started. The applause was thunderous. And in the front row, Simone Laurent wiped tears from her eyes and whispered to the woman next to her. Miriam would be so proud. Above them, the portrait of Dr. Miriam Marks seemed to smile a little wider, her fierce eyes watching over the foundation she'd built, the legacy she'd left, the granddaughter who'd survived everything and come home. The legacy lived again, and it would never die. Thank you for watching Ella's story. May you always remember your worth, carry your dignity, and never let anyone make you invisible.